उमा सर हमर प्रेसिडेंट को अलाउ करंतु आपण जो को-होस्ट हिसाब रे
सर को सही ना रहते
सर ना मीरा त्रिपाठी थाई पारे भी देखंदु आपण चेक करंतु
अमरेंद्र गुड मॉर्निंग
गुड मॉर्निंग
सब ठीक अछि हां
चंद्र बाबू सुशांत बाबू
हाँ नमस्कार सर
नमस्कार
आप पति बाबू तो व्यस्त असंती
सर नमस्कार सर
नमस्कार
Kannan sir has already joined with us. Good morning sir and welcome to Orissa Economics Association.
Morning Amarendra and Keshav.
Yes, namaste Kannan ji.
Namaste, how are you?
So,
sir, you can put your camera on, Kannan
yes,
sir.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I thought let all people come.
Okay sir.
सर पूर्ण नाम आपण जॉइन करते मीरा त्रिपाठी नहीं आपण सर जॉइन करले देखा जाऊ हां सर को-होस्ट हो गया अपने पोजीशन
Amarendra, how much time are you giving to the speakers?
Sir, half an hour.
Okay, that's more than enough.
Okay, sir.
Actually, the best thing would have been a physical mode, but then it was not possible.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to hug you, but I
No, no.
can't. I can't do that. I think maybe the technology will develop further.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, author disconnect କରିକି ବିଲକୁଲ author sir ସେ sir join ବେଳେ ଗୋଟେ ନାଟା ଗୋଟେ ଦେଖୁଥିବ ସେ ନାଟା କଣ ଦେଇଛନ୍ତି sir sir ଆପଣଙ୍କର ସେଠି ଉପରେ ଗୋଟେ ନାଟା ଦେଖୁଥିବ ମି ବୋଲି ଲେଖା ହେଇଛି ସେ ନାଟା କଣ ଦେଖୁଥିବ सर से जॉइंट समाज तले गोटे नाटा सर मानते हां सर ये सर जॉइंट ही रहा पूरा ऊपर सर अपन नाटा सर कौन सर गोटे मी बोली गोटे लिखा थियो पार्टिसिपेंट नहीं सेटा तो सर लेफ्ट साइड है राइट साइड सर अपन पार्टिसिपेंट सर क्लिक करो सर नॉले अपने रेज हैंड करो सर नॉले रेज हैंड करो सूर्य नारायण दिखा अपन अवश्य फसला सूर्य नारायण दिखा एबे सर देखो कना देखो सर अपन आगे कना सर ओके
Keshav, how is Ahmedabad treating you?
In fact, over time, like for the last 30 years, one good thing is the climate has really improved. In fact, this is one of the very fine, major changes towards more like it's a much more pleasant and no more very dusty. And it's a really nice weather-wise. Over the last 3 decades. And so any place like, for instance, Kerala or Orissa, with all my connections, humidity is something which is very difficult to take for us.
Okay.
So that is one of the major long-term change. But otherwise, in terms of the COVID and all that, we had the third wave affected many, but then it just lasted for not more than, let's say, maximum a week. In 4 or 5 days time, people were all right, but then this was much more widespread.
Oh, okay.
And people
is the reporting good?
You mean the official statistics on this?
Yeah.
That actually we are on, not just on COVID actually. So so we are famous or infamous or whatever for that. So that data is absolutely unreliable. In fact, particularly during the second phase, when there were several deaths which are known to everybody,
Okay.
so they would not, they had instructed hospitals that for every 100 deaths, you report only 3. So,
so you have to multiply everything by 33.
Absolutely. So that was the situation. So very, very big mixing up. But that has been there for most other sectors also. Like, so we never know, particularly, let's say, sanitation data, for instance.
Oh,
So they're absolutely unreliable. And if you do a field survey and compare that with the official this thing, there is a huge difference, in fact.
okay.
So,
Where is your daughter now?
she is right now here. She's working with an NGO, but she's shifting to Bombay from March.
Okay.
She studied at that National Law University in Bangalore. Some masters in public policy she did, and so then she is more. Sorry, I think the event is.
Very good. Very good. Nice to hear that.
Yeah.
And Tara is fine.
She's fine. She's fine. She's fine. In fact, we are planning maybe sometime. In fact, I'm going to Odisha, Delhi, Ranchi as part of study day after tomorrow. Raji also is part of that.
Okay.
And Tara and me, maybe I don't know, maybe another 1 or 2 months time will come.
Okay, okay. My daughter, she sees Raji occasionally in her
Yes,
university.
yes. Yeah, I know. Sir. No, she chose such interesting areas. I think somewhat different from you, but I think
Yes.
she has done very well at a very young stage. And the son is in Trivandrum or
He is in Singapore.
Singapore? Oh, I see.
He is in the modern digital
Okay.
world, digital marketing for a ride-hailing company like the Uber. They have in Southeast Asia, it's called Grab.
Okay.
So that's how we are alone. We too are alone.
I think most of us are like that or going to be like that. But I think because we have this very huge friend circle, that keeps us going actually. So I think I think that is something which particularly for people like us, just to talk to each other, that I think peps you up.
Yes.
So,
That's true. That's what is keeping us going. Some social activity.
Yes.
Sir, this is Dr. Pati from GM University, sir. I seek the permission of Honorable President, Orissa Economic Association to start the proceeding of the inaugural session, sir. Professor Tripathi, sir.
Welcome all of you to this 54th Orissa Economic Association conference, and I cordially invite all of you as the participants to this unique conference. I welcome all the guests and delegates of this conference, and I request the delegates to enter this session, though it is online, but there are some lively discussions that will take place. The discourse and deliberations will definitely enrich the quality of conference in this event. GM University, Gangadhar Mahar University, Sambalpur has taken a lot of pain in organizing this, and were really interested for having offline, but it could not happen due to the COVID situation. However, this is welcome to all of you. And I hope we will proceed as per our schedule. And so now there will be a presentation of Orissa Economic Association annual report by Dr. Amarendra Das, Secretary, Orissa Economic Association.
Thank you, sir. We start as per the agenda of the inaugural session, sir. Thank you for allowing us to start the proceeding. We'll start the proceeding of the inaugural session with the university anthem. We in the GM University have our own university anthem. We pay tribute to the great poet Gangadhar Mehar. So I request all of you to please pay respect to the university anthem.
Pani sa re ga sa re pa ga re sa ni sa. विश्व देखा मधुमय रे जीवन विश्व देखा मधुमय विश्व देखा मधुमय मधुर झरण करी बहरण मधुर झरण करी बहरण तो पाप मरण भय रे जीवन विश्व देखा मधुमय विश्व देखा स्नेह दयार प्रणय बुध बंधु सदालाप जनक आदर एक एक झर जनक आदर एक एक झर तड़ी देउछन्ति तापरे जीवन विश्व देखा मधुमय विश्व देखा मधुमय मधुमय बने मधुमय सने गाई मधुमय गीति विहंग मगण पुरान्ति श्रवण विहंग मगण पुरान्ति श्रवण मधु ढाली नीति नीति रे जीवन विश्व देखा मधुमय विश्व देखा मधुमय विश्व देखा
Thank you so much. On behalf of the School of Economics, Gangadhar Mehar University, Sambalpur, I welcome all of you to the 54th Annual Economic Conference being organized under the aegis of the Orissa Economics Association. And on behalf of the University Administration, the School of Economics, we are thankful to the President of the Orissa Economic Association, Professor Surjanarayan Tripathi sir, Secretary Dr. Amarendra Das sir, President-elect Professor Keshav Chandra Das sir, all other functionaries, Executive Council members, and all members of the Orissa Economic Council for allowing the GM University to organize this 54th version of the Annual Economic Conference under the Orissa Economic Association. A strong word of appreciation for our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. Nagaraju sir, because he is the person behind the success of all academic programs at the GM University. He encouraged us, inspired us to go for this particular conference. So we are thankful to Professor Nagaraju sir. And sir is present here on the dais for the inaugural session despite his busy schedule. We are thankful to our registrar ma'am, Srimati Jugaleshwari Das, despite being an administrative cadre officer. She has been very supportive all along, and she is also present on the dais. I am thankful to Professor Mohin Mohammed, Chairman, PG Council, Postgraduate Council of GM University. He has been a constant source for inspiration for all of us. I am thankful to all the officers, the COF, the teaching and non-teaching staff, all HODs, and all the faculty members of GM University, and most prominently the technical team who is supporting us in streaming this program live in the online mode. Friends, the GM University is, as a university, it is a new university. We are just 6 years old, but as an institution, we have completed 78 years. Very old institution, highly reputed in Odisha. The erstwhile Gangadhar Mehar College, now it is Gangadhar Mehar University. We are conducting a number of national, international seminars and conferences, but this one is very special to our heart. because you are conducting, the School of Economics is conducting the Orissa Economic Conference this year. Last year, when our new Vice Chancellor joined, he encouraged us to go for this particular conference. So in the Executive Council meeting, we proposed under the leadership of our HOD, Madam Srimati Dr. Prabhati Panda. So we requested the Orissa Economic Conference Association to allow us to conduct this program, and we are thankful they allowed us. We wanted to have it in the physical mode. We wanted to have a grand celebration in the physical mode, because it has not been conducted in Western Orissa in the last 20 to 23 years time. But unfortunately, the Omicron issue put us into trouble, and therefore we are forced to go in the online mode. Despite that, we have tried our best with the help of our administration and the department colleagues to conduct in the online mode. Thank you everyone for joining online through the Zoom platform for this conference. We are trying our best to make it error-free, and our technical team is working very hard to make it an error-free event. I must thank our syndicate members and members of the Academic Council for their support, and the public and intelligentsia of Sambalpur, the retired teachers of GM College, GM University, and most importantly, the retired teachers of the Department of Economics of GM College and GM University, because it is their efforts that we have inherited this institution to the level that we are now in. I must thank the Government of Odisha, Department of Higher Education for their support all along. We are thankful to the district administration, Sambalpur. We are thankful to the local media and everyone, those who have supported us directly and indirectly in conduct of this particular program and all other academic programs in the GM University as well. Friends and all my dear students present here, this is an occasion where our next generation students, they will learn how to think economics, how to act economics, and how to visualize the future of economics in the state of Odisha. So we believe that this particular event in the GM University will definitely expose our students to the talent and expertise of all the economists, those who have joined from national international forums. Our commitment to the cause of the state of Odisha and India is unquestionable. Under the above leadership of our Honorable Vice Chancellor and Registrar and all other functionaries in GM University, we are trying hard to make the institution visible in the national and international forum. So I must say, and I have already talked to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, that in the days to come, the GM University School of Economics will be in association with the Orissa Economic Association in other activities too. I must appreciate and also thank our Secretary, Amarendra Das sir, because he proposed us to conduct one workshop, a consultative workshop on the Vision 2036 document of the Odisha government, because Odisha is completing 100 years in 2036. And let me tell you, our Vice Chancellor has allowed us to be a part of any constructive activities for the state and the country. So therefore, I take this opportunity to tell you that the GM University and the School of Economics is ready to extend all helping hands and be a part of all such constructive activities in future. So we are ready to conduct any such activities which will empower and enrich the economic climate of the state of Odisha. Please be with us and please bear with us for any technical snacks. Our technical team is constantly working on it. In case of any difficulties, please keep in touch with me. I have already shared my mobile number, email IDs and everything. So please feel free to contact us for any technical issues or any difficulties that you face. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. I must thank our university administration for giving time for this, and all the heads of the departments, all the faculties, and most importantly, all our students and research scholars, they are present here. Thank you so much. Now, I request Honorable President, Orissa Economic Association, Professor Sujanaran Tripathi sir, to preside over the meeting, and then we'll move forward as per the agenda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umacharan Pati, the organizing secretary, for your welcome note regarding the conference. Now I request Dr. Amarendra Das, Secretary of Orissa Economic Association, to present the annual report of association.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So, namaskar and good morning to all. Honorable President of the conference and Orissa Economics Association, Professor Sujanaran Tripathi, the members of the executive committee, the Vice Chancellor of Gangadhar Meher University, Professor N. Nagaraju, the chief guest of the conference, Professor K.P. Kannan, former Director at Center for Development Studies, Tirunananthapuram, and also my teacher. Actually, I was a student when Professor Kannan was the Director of Center for Development Studies, and after that, he went to the National Commission for Unorganized Sector to work in Delhi. So my teacher, Professor K.P. Kannan. Then our special guest from Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Devaprasad Rath, Officer in Charge, Department of Economic Policy Research, Reserve Bank of India, Reserve Bank. And then our keynote speakers, Professor Suresh Babu M. From IIT Madras, and Professor Peter Noringa, International Institute of Social Sciences, Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He will join with us tomorrow. The local organizing secretary, Dr. Uma Charan Pati, the faculty members and students of Gangadhar Meher University, the president-elect, Professor Kesav Das, and all paper presenters, the live members of ORISSA Economic Association, and all other participants of the conference. On behalf of the ORISSA Economics Association, I welcome you all to this 54th annual virtual conference of the ORISSA Economics Association. Initially, we had planned for a hybrid mode of this conference. However, the surge in the COVID-19 cases with its new variant, Omicron, forced us to go online. I feel that the COVID-19 pandemic has done at least one good thing. Without traveling anywhere, we are still able to connect intellectually around the globe. Although you all will be missing the good food during the conference, I strongly feel that that can be compensated with the good food for our thoughts. The ORISSA Economics Association was founded in 1968 and was accorded the status of a learned registered society by the government of Odisha under the Societies Act 1868. It is one of the oldest regional academic associations in the country. The objectives of the association are to engage with debates and discussions on economic issues of contemporary relevance through seminars, symposia, and similar events, to contribute towards improving methods and approaches of teaching economics in the state, to strengthen the overall socio-economic research environment and provide policy inputs to the state based on rigorous research, to disseminate research findings and contribute to the capacity building of young and aspiring researchers and teachers. The membership of the association is open to persons of different walks of life, including teachers and researchers in economics, bureaucrats, professionals, planners, and policymakers. The association has three categories of members: institutional membership, life membership, and annual membership. With a modest beginning of 40 members, the association now has 3 institutional members and 730 life members. I am sure after this conference, many of you would be interested to join the Orissa Economics Association as life member. This year, the themes of the conference are COVID-19, Indian economy, and the economic recovery. And second theme is innovation systems and inclusive development. A total of 54 authors will present their paper over next 2 days. After the inaugural session at 12:30 p.m., Professor Suresh Babu from IIT Madras will deliver the keynote address on the theme 1, and Professor Peter Noringa from International Institute of Social Sciences, Erasmus University, Rotterdam, will deliver keynote address on theme 2 tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. And Dr. Devaprasad Rath, Officer in Charge, Department of Economic and Policy Research, RBI, will deliver the valedictory address tomorrow in the evening. You all are aware that our 53-year-old economic journal, Orissa Economic Journal, is now enlisted in the UGC care. With this recognition, we assume more responsibility to enhance the quality of the journal. Due to the concerted efforts of the editorial team and especially the executive editor, Professor Kesav Das, we are able to bring out 4 issues of this journal last year. This year, we shall be bringing 3 issues of the journal. In fact, we will be releasing 1 issue today. In fact, after my annual report presentation. So I would request the president also to allow that to happen. And then we have taken up a number of measures to enhance the quality of the journal under the leadership of the executive editor of the journal, Professor Keshav Das. I express my deep sense of gratitude to him for all his dedication and hard works. With the approval of the executive committee and the consent of the family members of late Professors K.M. Patnaik, Vaidhanath Mishra and Advaita Mahanti, we have rescheduled the memorial and endowment lectures to their birth months, which is being done on virtual platform. Professor Tapas Mishra, University of Southampton, UK, delivered the 3rd Professor Advaita Mahanti Memorial Lecture on 14th March 2021. Professor Jayaprakash Pradhan, Central University, Gujarat, delivered the 8th Professor Khetra Mohan Patnaik Memorial Lecture on May 10th, 2021. Professor Devashish Mishra, ISI Delhi, delivered the 14th Professor Vaidhanath Mishra Endowment Lecture on November 22nd, 2021. We all know that Odisha will turn 100 years old in 2036. In this context, Orissa Economics Association is preparing Odisha Vision 2036 to evaluate the journey of Odisha in last 86 years and provide a roadmap for the development of Odisha in coming 13 years. For this purpose, we are bringing out this Odisha Vision 2036. For this purpose, we organized a virtual consultation meeting to collect feedback for preparing the outline of the report on 14th April 2021. A galaxy of learned economists, to name a few, Professor Prabhat Patnaik, Professor Pulin Naik, Professor Uday Shankar Mishra, Professor Deepak Mishra from JNU, Professor Keshav Das, Professor Saudamini Das, and so on, spoke in this workshop. After preparing the chapter outline of the vision document, we had organized a chapter writers workshop on May 28, 2021, in which about 40 authors shared the chapter outline of their respective chapters. In order to make the report inclusive and realistic, we are doing public consultations for each chapter. We have already finished the consultation for agriculture, industry, and the status of women in Odisha. The recordings of all these meetings are available on the YouTube channel of Orissa Economics Association. We shall be resuming the consultations for other chapters soon after this conference. We also had launched the OEA blogs last year, and we are publishing short articles to facilitate informed debate and discussion on the contemporary economic issues. We have also published one interview of the eminent economist of Odisha, Professor Prashant Patnaik, on this blog. In order to document the legacy of the association, we are conducting interviews of veteran members of OEA and publishing it on the YouTube channel of OEA. The newsletter of the association named Arthavarta, which documents all activities of OEA in the last 1 year, is also available on our website. Last and most importantly, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor of Gangadhar Meher University, Professor N. Nagaraju, Dr. Umacharan Pati, the local organizing secretary of this conference, and all the faculty members of the Economics Department of Gangadhar Meher University for hosting this conference at Gangadhar Meher University, Sambalpur. In fact, this is the second time they are doing it, because when Gangadhar Meher was a college, when it was a college, they had also organized this conference in 1980s. So after a long time, they are doing it again for the second time, and first time as the university. So they are very much keen to organize this conference in hybrid mode, and I was also very much keen to go there physically. However, the spread of Omicron variant of COVID forced us to organize this conference online only. I hope in future we shall be able to organize some other event, such as the consultation exercise of Odisha Vision document at Gangadhar Meher University in physical mode. And I also thank all the participants who have joined with us online, and especially our chief guest and all the panel speakers, and also the paper presenters. So at the end, I welcome all of you to this conference, and I look forward to a very meaningful academic deliberation over 2 days. With this, I conclude the annual report. Thank you very much. And I would also request the president to allow us to release the journal of the association and also the conference brochure and the newsletter of the association.
Thank you, Dr. Amarendra, for your vivid and comprehensive presentation on multidimensional activities of the Orissa Economic Association. Now, I request a release of the Orissa Economic Journal, newsletter, and voucher of the conference.
Okay, so I am now first sharing the journal with all of you, and then a newsletter, and then at the end I will request Uma sir to share the conference brochure. So I am going with the journal first.
Wait, share na karu.
So I hope you all can see the journal. So this is the 53 volume 53 and issue 1 of 2021 journal, Orissa Economic Journal. And I am sharing also the content of the journal, editorial, and yeah. So this is the content I'm sharing. But no, I should not speak much on this. I would request the executive editor of the journal, who has taken all the pen to bring out this issue. So I invite Professor Keshav Das to speak a few words. He is the boss of this journal. Yeah. So over to you, sir, Keshav sir.
Thank you very much. I think welcome to all the participants. It's a huge number, more than 200, and we have distinguished guests, including Professor K.P. Kannan. We are very honored. So regarding the journal, as Amarendra did mention, that this has been a kind of a journey towards improving the quality, both in terms of presentation, in terms of content, and also in terms of the language. So that effort is on, and we are sort of getting the review process, the peer review process, in a very rigorous way, which has meant that there is a lot of rejections, but then also we have received excellent comments from experts, and all that probably gives us a lot of hope, despite a variety of challenges that we are facing, but it gives us hope that we would definitely improve the quality, and this will attract wider audience. And so that is the only effort that we are making. So thank you very much, Amarendra.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Now I will share the newsletter of the journal, which is already available on the website of our association. And yeah, this is the newsletter where we have documented all activities of the association. And I'm just scrolling down. Yeah, so these are the past events. This is the photos of the last conference that we had organized virtually. And these are the memorial lectures that we organized. Professor Khetarmohan Patnaik Memorial Lecture, Vaidyanath Mishra Memorial Lecture, and Aditya Mahanti Memorial Lecture. And yeah, then a lot of consultation on Odisha Vision. So photos of some of the panelists. And yeah, and then the writers of the Odisha Vision document. We have a huge report that we are preparing, and then these are the people who were involved in this. And then we did sector-wise consultation. So these are the speakers for our agriculture session. Then we had a consultation on industry. These are the speakers. And then we did a 3 days consultation on the status of women in Odisha. And these are also the speakers. And then we are also inviting suggestions for the Odisha Vision document. This is the email ID where you can share your visions. And then this is the OEA blog where all of you can submit your articles. And we have an editorial team. The editor-in-chief is Professor Amalendu Jyotishi of Azim Premji University. So he and his team do the editing things. And this is the journal. And we have the editorial team of this. And we have also advisory body, including Prasant Patnaik and so on. And yeah, so this is the event that we are doing now. So with this, I now conclude my part. Now I invite Dr. Umasaran Pati to share his conference proceeding. Over to you, Uma sir.
Thank you, sir. So we have prepared the conference brochure. All the abstracts have been included, and we are thankful to our technical team for taking the pen and completing in time. We have included, so I request our technical team to share the soft copy of the brochure. This is the cover page of the brochure 54th annual conference of the ORISSA Economic Association. Just scroll 2-3 pages. So they includes messages from Honorable Governor of Orissa, then Minister of Higher Education, President OEA, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Registrar, Secretary OEA. And this is a poster of the conference, and it is followed by the total program schedule. And I will be sharing the brochure to all the esteemed members of the Orissa Economic Association today itself. So thank you so much. I'll stop it. Now, as per the agenda, we'll move to the next point, that is introduction of the guest of honor. So
Head of the Department of Economics, Gangadhar Mayer University, Dr. Pawati Panda, is to introduce the guest of honor.
Good morning, everyone. Esteemed President, Orissa Economic Association, Professor Tripathi, Secretary Dr. Das, respected Chief Guest, Professor Kannan, respected Vice Chancellor of GM University, Madam Registrar, Chairman PG Council, Dr. Pati, all the dignitaries and participants present over here and participating in online mode. As the convener, I, on behalf of the School of Economics, GM University, welcome you all to the 54th annual conference of the Orissa Economics Association. It is exciting for us because after a gap of more than 20 years, it is being organized in Sambalpur. Coincidentally, last time also, I was a part of the organizing committee of this conference. And the topics that has been chosen by the association, as usual, is quite relevant in the current situation, the pandemic and the Indian economy, and also the importance of innovation for inclusive growth. Innovation's importance for growth was already cited by Schumpeter almost a century ago, and now it's inclusive growth which is in focus. So that is also quite relevant. I have the privilege of introducing our guest of honor, the Vice Chancellor, GM University, Professor Nagaraju. Professor Nagaraju completed his higher education from Berhampur and Utkal universities. He got his doctoral degree with the support from American Studies Research Center in the area of post-war Jewish fiction. In a career spanning more than 3 decades, he taught at Rajiv Gandhi Central University, Adikabi Nannaya University, and Central University of Karnataka, apart from visiting assignments at other Indian universities. He presented papers at various national and international conferences, including a recent one at the conference of SALA in Washington University, Seattle, America. His publications include papers on public sphere, Indian writing in English, post-colonial literatures, an edited book on Arunachal culture and others on village studies, Native American literature and disciplinarity. His current interests include tribal literature and ecological literatures. Professor Nagaraju held various administrative positions since the year 1997, 3 terms as head of the department, 3 terms as dean and academic advisor at the 3 universities mentioned above. He was registrar from 2014 to 16 at Central University of Karnataka. He held the charge of vice chancellor several times for short periods before being appointed as the vice chancellor of Gangadhar Meher University. Thank you. Now I request Professor Nagaraju to address the conference. Please, sir.
Okay. First of all, Chairman, PG Council, Gangadhar Meher University, Registrar, Head of the Department, School of Economics, Local Organizing Secretary, Dr. Uma Chanpati, colleagues in various departments of the university, dear students, I join all of you in welcoming to Gangadhar Meher University the President, Secretary, the Executive, members and delegates of ORISSA Economic Association. We are very, very happy to have been part of this annual meet, our annual conference. When Madam Prabhati Panda and Dr. Pati approached for the joint organization of this 54th annual conference, I immediately agreed, because Orissa Economic Association has more than half century of very purposeful existence, and it has in its very distinguished economists like the president himself, Prabhat Patnaik and Prashant Patnaik, and a host of others. We are very, very glad that they are part of this association. And it has more than 700 life members. I think a very welcome strength for the university, association and its activities. Apart from this, we at GM University, we have a task to perform. And our invitation to Orissa Economic Society is part of this enlarging task. The first one is, we know the increased importance of economics as a discipline, given the knowledge economy that the whole of the country is part of. Second, a new university. This is an old institution which established in 1940s. And as the secretary told, in 80s, it held a conference of the academic association. But as an old institution which is close to the heart of the people of Sambalpur and Western Odisha, it now has been upgraded to a university, and this university has to set up certain requisite academic and research standards and benchmarks. And our association with the Economic Association should help us in setting up these benchmarks, particularly in research. The third is, the other day I got a call from the director, Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur. He has in mind that GM University, IIM Sambalpur, and Sambalpur University must come together and think of ways of analyzing and, if possible, supporting the economic development of the region. I think we would be very happy if Orissa, Economic Association can help these institutions in moving forward in this activity. I think I'm very, very happy that a senior professor like Professor Tripathi is heading the association, and they have brought out a journal, which is a very, very important activity to enhance and encourage the research activities of its members. And I would look forward to these 2 days of important deliberations, and hopefully these deliberations will include the agenda, the issues of Odisha, and particularly Western Odisha. I wouldn't say much, but I once again welcome all of you, esteemed executive of the association and delegates, and all the members present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for expressing your ideas and encouraging the members of the association for their participation and bring out innovative solutions to the problems of Odisha. So now I request Dr. Manoj Kumar Das, Assistant Secretary of Odisha Economic Association, for introduction of the chief guest.
Very good morning to one and all. Esteemed President, Secretary of the Association, Vice Chancellor Gangadhar Meher University, Organizing Secretary, esteemed members on the dais, of the dais, my fellow OEA members, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. In this event, actually, we have with us one of the distinguishing economist, academician, Professor K.P. Kannan as the chief guest. Professor K.P. Kannan, a development economist, was a member of the faculty of CDS from 1973 to 2011, where he became a fellow professor as well as director. Currently, he holds the position of an honorary fellow at the CDS. In February 2015, he was invited as a member of the International Panel on Social Progress, a collective initiative of social scientists from different parts of the world, led by Professor Amartya Sen, which prepared and released a 3-volume global report on society in the 21st century in June 2018, published by one of the prestigious publishing house, Cambridge University Press. Professor Kannan is also associated with the Center of Science and Technology for Rural Development and the Laurie Baker Center for Habitat Studies, Thiruvananthapuram. Professor Kannan has had several UN assignments, the most important of which was an expert member in the Technical Secretariat of the World Commission on Social Dimension of Globalization, constituted by the ILO in Geneva. During 1995 to 97, he worked as the professor of development studies and research director at the Cambodia Development Research Institute in Phnom Penh. Recently, he worked as the member of a UN team that produced a post-disaster needs assessment report for the state of Kerala after its devastating floods in August 2018. During 2005 to 9, he was invited as a full-time member of the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, appointed by Honorable Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, known as the Arjun Sengupta Commission, that prepared a number of major reports on the informal economy and informal workers in India. In 2008, he was conferred the first V.V. Giri Memorial Award for his contribution in the area of social security, especially for the informal workers. He has served in various committees of the Government of India and Kerala. In recognition of his contribution to the development studies in India, the Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR, awarded a 2-year national fellowship to Professor Kannan during 2016 to 2018. Professor Kannan took his post-graduation in economics from the University of Bombay, now Mumbai, in 1973, with first rank, gold medal, and PhD in development studies in 1986 from the International Institute of Social Studies, The Hague in the Netherlands. Professor Kannan has authored, co-authored, or edited 12 books as well as a number of research papers. His recent book include Kerala in Transition, Essays on Economy, Polity, and Society, edited volume, published by the Laurie Becker Center for Habitat Studies. Labor and Development, published by Academic Foundation, New Delhi, 2016. So we have with us this distinguishing professor, and we welcome you, sir, to this 54th annual conference of OUA. Now, I again thank the organizing members to give me this opportunity to introduce such a illuminary academician. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, for your presentation about our chief guest. Now, I invite Professor K.P. Kannan, an internationally acknowledged and distinguished professor and policymakers of our country, to make his presentation on the topic coping with COVID pandemic and after, some concerns on poverty and inequalities in India.
Thank you. First of all, let me say a word of thanks to the organizers of this conference, for the president of the ORISSA Economic Association, the secretary and president-elect, and my friend and distinguished alumni of CDS, Professor Keshav Das, and a whole lot of other friends and members of this organization. When they invited me, I was somewhat in a reluctant mode, partly because the notice was so short, and I don't know what the association expects from me, and hence I thought whether I should accept it or not. But when the invitation comes from your own fraternity, it's very difficult to say no. And that's one of the strengths of an alumni society. So I took the liberty of accepting and agree to speak. But I'm going to speak extempo because I have not really prepared a text, and you should pardon me for that because this is a serious conference. But I have been involved in a number of studies earlier where the issue of poverty and inequality in India were examined in some detail, and I think some of you know that. In fact, in India, we have no dearth of studies on these two important issues of poverty and inequality. Although the reality of accentuating inequality is still very much there. So it's not for lack of studies. I think there are reasons that are well beyond the academic world of understanding of the problem. I'll be brief since there are a number of other important lectures. But let me say that we are in a situation of COVID pandemic, COVID-induced pandemic, for the last 2 years or even more. And we don't see any definite signs of this pandemic going away completely. Not only from our country, but from a large number of countries. I don't think this has happened for the last 100 years or so. The historical memory is that of Spanish flu, when the advances in medical sciences and technology were considerably lower than what we have today. And yet, we are struggling with coping with this problem of pandemic, let alone eliminating it. So in a sense, it also tells us that there are what we call in economics, there are uncertainties, but uncertainties that we not normally associate with our economic functioning, but uncertainties that are of a global character, of exogenous shocks that are not local, but that are global. Of course, countries have coped with it. It has not been as devastating as it was in the last pandemic because of the progress in medicine and medical sciences and technology and the availability of vaccines quite early from a historical point of view. But my own feeling and my own understanding is that in India, we are going through a turning point. I think in our long journey of economic development, this is likely to be a watermark. Because without the government telling us in so many words, we all know that fundamental changes are taking place in the way we conduct ourselves, both economically, from the economic sphere as well as in the social sphere. And that's why we have this virtual conference. So technologies like this are helping us to be in touch with each other, but not necessarily producing the value that would have been produced if you had conducted it in ORISSA, providing a lot of employment to people who will be serving us food, who will be taking care of our accommodation and other arrangements, who will be printing papers, distributing them, volunteers. You would have generated a certain amount of economic activity and distribution of income. So that's not happening. So we are conducting our business without really creating economic value for a large number of people, isn't it? And I think that is a paradigmatic change. And we are yet to sink in ourselves that this is going to be a turning point. Why I say this is that the world of work is also undergoing a change. And those of us who are lucky enough to be in the middle class, educated or upper class, we are happy to be working from home. In a whole number of jobs and services, especially where physical presence is not needed, whether it is, for providing software services, online marketing, or even teaching, and a whole range of things. That has not been the case before, although some online services were coming, but now the whole scale economic activities are being conducted to the extent possible through a remote system of working. That, if you really think through that, that kind of fundamental change in the organization of work and related activities, if you think through that, it will have enormous consequences for inequality. In a society, in a country like ours, where to begin with, we have so many inequalities, what I would like to call manifold inequalities. Our inequality is not one. Our inequalities are many. Although we talk about economic inequality, it's only one part of the inequality, isn't it? And what researchers have shown, and also if I may tell you what the work that we did in the Arjun Sengupta Commission, by looking at the informal economy and the people who are working in it, because they are well-defined groups who happen to be falling out of the system of the formal economy, and by default they have to create their own economic space in the informal economy. And that the correlation of informal economy with low education, with initial poverty, with low social network, and also social status in a hierarchical society is so strong. So it is, when we talk about inequality as between formal and informal economy, we are really talking about two social groups also. And I think that will have to be kept in mind. So if you are already in a better position today to take advantage of the new organization of work and the new organization of communication, you will not feel much of an impact of this kind of pandemic. But if you are down below, let's say very liberally, the bottom 50% of the population, who don't even have any internet connection, or even not even have electricity, let alone internet connection, who do not have the knowledge, basic knowledge of how to operate a mobile telephone system, or let alone a computer system, and who do not have the wherewithal, the economic capacity to purchase these things, nor they may be located in a place where these are available, in rural areas, you will find a greater degree of exclusion from the new, what some people call knowledge economy, some people call information economy, or digital economy. So you might be facing for years to come a new type of acceleration of inequality in this country. This doesn't give us a very optimistic picture, but as economists, I think we have a moral and also professional responsibility to see through the superficial claims and other, positive vibes that come from government and state authorities, because for them, being led by politics and political parties, they would like to give only the positive, the good part of the story. Why I say is that when the finance minister recently announced her budget, in a very calm and quiet manner, unlike her in the earlier budget presentations, she said we have grown 9.2% during the last year, 2021. And that came to me, at least to me, somewhat of a surprise. But then you will not be surprised anymore if you go into the details, because that growth is a process of recovery. Having lost in the earlier period a 7.5% decline in national income. You are now getting back to the earlier stage, and for which you need a greater growth because the base is low. No? So the 9% growth is now compensating and a little bit of marginal surplus to you where we were 2 years ago, pre-pandemic levels. But if you look at it slightly differently, as I would like to do, had there not been this pandemic, or if we were successful in coping with the pandemic without affecting the growth process adversely, we would have grown at a much higher level. So if you take the long-term trend of around 30-year trend of 6%, we would have reached a national income that would be 16.3 lakh crores higher than what it is today. This is my estimate. So if there was no downswing and then recovery, and we would have grown as we were before, we would have reached around 163.7 lakh crores in national income, as against what we have actually earned, 147.5 lakh crores. So the difference is 16.3 lakh crores. That is a big loss, almost 10% loss over a period of 2 years in absolute terms. And for the government, there's a further loss because the government of India, roughly speaking, gets around 10% of the national income as taxes and other forms of revenue. So what the government lost was 1.6 lakh crores of rupees. That would have been available for the kind of developmental activities that the government wants to do. So that is the, an example of the loss that we have gone through. But that's not the only loss. The loss is for ordinary people because they don't understand the gross national income and higher per capita income, because these are statistical artifacts. No, it doesn't go to everybody in the same way. So if I get the same per capita income as everybody else, then we all will be equal. So that doesn't happen. What is their concern? Their concern is whether they are able to get work, able to get a job that will earn them a reasonable income. So when myself and a colleague of mine, some of you know, Dr. Imran Khan, we looked at the 1920 NSS round of data on employment and compared it with the pre-COVID year, 18-19, we found that there has been an increase in the workforce by 11 million. Now, this is a very paradoxical result. You have a decline in national income, but you have an increase in the first year of the COVID in employment. But when we go into the details, we were not surprised at all. That's because, you see, when the large number of millions of migrant workers experience an exodus, I would say it's an exodus, not just a return. It's an exodus from the urban areas to rural areas. When they went back, they had to survive. The families have to survive. Plus those households who also lost their jobs in their localities. So if you are in the bottom 50% of the population, in a pandemic, you cannot sit alone just because work is not there. So you have to survive. So you create your own work by engaging in some self-employment. And that's what happened because there has been an increase of 20 million people, women, into the workforce. And most of these women were found to be working as self-employed. 80% of them were in self-employed or in a very low wage, regular, like domestic servants and so on and so forth in their local economies. So if you minus this 20 million increase of women and the 11 million men who lost their jobs, then you have a net increase of 9 million. So what happened is that because men substantially lost wage labor, wage employment, the women had to compensate to keep the family going. That's the story. So when you get a quantitative increase in the workforce, don't be surprised that this is not at all a paradox. This is because when we further probed into their wage income, the total wage income in the economy, we found that between pre-COVID and the first year of the COVID, there has been a net decline in the wage income by 10%. So you have an increase in the workforce, but you have a decrease in the wage income. That reinforces our story that these are all survival type of employment. So I would like to flag this kind of phenomenon. And I think it might be an interesting idea to look at the state-wise scenario. And one can look at Orissa, one can look at Kerala or Maharashtra, whichever state that we want, and see how it has played itself out in the regional context. And because employment is so important. But what I want to bring out in this background is the government's, because the state is all in all in a country like India or any developing country without civil wars. If you have a civil war, then you don't have anyone to look up to for the societal change. So the state is everything. What is the state policy? The state policy has been anchored in an ideology of neoliberalism, which what we know usually in the literature we refer to as the Washington Consensus, isn't it? Where you are persuading the states because they are the lenders of money for countries in debt or countries who come and seek their help. Or sometimes they go and say that we will help you because they want to change the policies, that you withdraw from most of the economic activities. Let the private sector take over most of the economic activities. You create an enabling environment, and that enabling environment would include a monetary policy that will make available credit as cheap as possible. And who are the people who are able to take advantage of that credit is the corporate sector. Because most of the other poor, or what we call the informal economy, their credit needs are quite small. And because that has to be in proportion with their ability to repay, isn't it? And the state also encourages the corporate sector by giving more tax concessions and giving what they call the subsidies when it comes to giving extra help or promotional advantages to the corporate sector. Our central state or the central government would call it incentives. But when they give some food grains, rations, or some fertilizer at a cheaper rate, they will call it subsidies or doling out. So you can also see how the semantics also plays a very interesting role in justifying a certain kind of inequality, economic inequality. If an industry gets land at low prices given by the state, or it gets tax concessions, these are called incentives. But if the poor people get a little bit of kerosene or rice or fertilizer subsidy, it's called a subsidy, a drain on public resources. And that is the ideology. Therefore, I recently spoke at the budget as ideology. Because budget, although it is an accounting exercise, in the accounting exercise, the way expenditure is arranged and the way the money is raised to meet those expenditures reflect the overall economic ideology of the regime in power. And that's why I often say that is what we labor to say in our reports for the Unorganized Sector Commission, as well as in my book on interrogating inclusive growth in India on poverty and inequality. So that will have to be kept in mind. My own concern, both as an economist and as a citizen, is that there is excessive emphasis by the state, whether the regional state or the national state, on absolute poverty. I don't say it is not warranted, it is warranted. when people are below the poverty line or poverty threshold, they need to be helped. But they take it in isolation and say we are attacking poverty, and then say we are following an inclusive growth. What does the inclusion mean? Inclusion means as you are growing and as you are spending, especially from the state, the poor are also getting something, but never with reference to what the non-poor is getting. So you don't bring in the relative allocation or the relative benefits. You only talk about the absolute benefit that is being given to by a section of what you define as poor, which is important. I don't say that poor should not be pulled out in an absolute term. But I get from 100 rupees to 110 rupees. My neighbor gets from 1,000 rupees to 3,000 rupees. I feel more poorer today than I was before, because in relative terms, and that is what has happened to inequality. In fact, ever since Thomas Piketty's book came, Capital in the 21st Century, came, the whole process of global growth and global economic change has been one of unequal. And that's what he emphasized, and how the financial sector propels that further. What we in India have also experienced is the same. And there are different measures of inequality that most of you know. And some inequalities are mind-boggling inequalities in a poor country like ours. If you look at the recent Oxfam report on inequality, what it reports is 10% of Indians have 57% of the national income. So the 90% of Indians get 43% of the national income. So the gap is 12 times. So every 1 rupee on an average that goes to the 90%, the 10% gets 12 times of that. So well, this is something that is, in my view, has enormous consequences, not only for economic performance later, because your effective demand gets truncated into a few people who have enormous income and a large segment who have a lower and lower share. So if you really go by Keynesian logic, that's if you don't have purchasing power, you don't have much of an effective demand. When you have purchasing power, then you have more effective demand. If the effective demand comes from the 10% and not the 90%, then you will have a type of growth that earlier we used to call Latin Americanization, because you will have more demand for luxury goods, more demand for capital intensive goods, because that is what caters to the people who have income. So it is not just a moral question. Of course, moral question is very much there, but there is also a plain macroeconomic logic that your ability to have more and more a higher growth with a broad base will get curtailed. And that is the consequence of creating more inequality. So inequality is not just something that we don't like, it's a morally repugnant, but inequality also, from an economic logic point of view, will drive the economy to a growth path which will be based on narrower effective demand. And that is the thing that I wanted to. Now, some of you at least would expect me to say something on the Indian state's economy. I must say that I am not I've looked at some of the regional patterns in social inequality combined with economic inequality. And I have also argued that social inequality in India is much more stronger than economic inequality. And I've also said that social inequality and economic inequality has a very large correlation. Now, why do I say so? Now, if you look at the social side of our society, it is a hierarchical society. And we know that at the bottom of this social hierarchy or two major groups who account for a quarter of the population, which is a very large number. That's what constitutionally called scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So even after 70, 75 years of freedom, we cannot say with any confidence that they are able to enjoy an average standard of living like other Indians. No, we don't have. But in this hierarchical structure, I also found that there is a bottom, there is a middle, and there is a top. And that is a historical story, because whatever historical hierarchy we had created has not changed by and large in terms of economic terms. Whether you take income, whether you take energy, the anemia, or any other kinds of science, or jobs, formal, informal jobs, education. So much of the what I earlier called manifold inequalities, if you transpose them in a matrix of social category, you will find there is a strong correlation. So attacking social inequality, in a way, you will also be attacking all the other dimensions of inequality, not to a 100% extent, but to a substantial extent. But then I have a slightly more, well, I won't say hypothesis, but I would say which has a lot of empirical this thing, but the national statistical system doesn't allow us. And that is, these inequalities ultimately, if not exactly, but substantially reflect in our rural-urban inequalities. Unfortunately, we don't have national income data that splits between rural and urban. Occasionally, they did a few years ago, but that practice has been stopped. So if only we are a little more sensitive to rural India in the official statistical system, we would have come out with what is the share of the rural economy in our national income, what is it in our. So I use a proxy just for your immediate flagging by looking at the last 3 years budget. I took 4 major heads of expenditure for rural areas: agriculture, fertilizer subsidy, food procurement expenditure, and rural development, which includes national employment, NREGA program. Then I took for urban areas, urban development, the head urban development, IT, infrastructure, big infrastructure like the railways, aviation. These are all urban oriented in its ultimate beneficiary. Scientific establishments, IT industry, so 5 of them. And I compared them last 3 years, 1920 to 22-23. 22-23 is the budget estimate. 1920 is the actual. 2021 is also the actual now. 30%, almost 29% of the budget was 3 years ago earmarked for rural economy in these 4 programs. That share has now come down to 17%. So it's a 13% share loss in the budget. Whereas what was earmarked for urban areas was already high, 12%. That has increased to 17%. So in these sets of programs, this is a very limited exercise, but major heads of expenditure. The urban areas get 17% of the budget. Rural areas also get 17%. But that's not equal, because 2/3 of the population now lives in rural areas and 1/3 is in urban areas. So basically, if you are spending 1 rupee for urban, you are 2 rupees for urban, you are just spending 1 rupee for rural. So it's just the double that difference. So there is an inherent bias towards urban economy. And I put all these things together because the government emphasis on creating digital universities. From a purely absolute point of view, there is nothing wrong in it, but you can't have an edifice in weak foundations. You don't have enough schools in the villages, enough family healthcare centers, and our conducive context for our poor girl children to go to school, have nutritious meals in Anganwadis, and then you are building up world-class universities, or at least spending money for that. So there is some mismatch. You know, you are building royal castles in foundations of sand. It is just like that. And that inherent urban, I don't call it any personal bias, but it's also derives from a neoliberal economic ideology, because the neoliberal economic program and ideology is to maximize growth. No? That's what they say. So if you maximize growth, something will trickle down, and you can do here and there a little bit through transfer payments, but that is limited by government fiscal deficit cap. So even that is also limited. So in that sense, so when you have to maximize growth, then you have to, what I would like to call, betting on the strong. So you can only grow if you have strong sectors. So your aviation, if more tourists come, then you put more money on aviation. IT sector, but you already need people with at least college level education. So you bet on the people who have already educated. So educated, skilled, better infrastructure, better global connections, better financial systems. So a whole lot of things which are concentrated in urban areas, they function as the engines for growth in a neoliberal sense. So one of the consequences of the neoliberal economic ideology, especially in a highly differentiated poor economy and society like India, is inequality. And this is also true for China, where they claim that they have leveled the society, but they reversed the whole thing. Everything, many of the things were privatized, means of production, although state has an absolute control over who should get what and all that. But China is now today one of the highest economic inequalities. And that we are. Coming to the states, so if you look at a state like Orissa, I've been reading some of the papers Dr. Das sent me, and some of them are interesting because there is like most other states, the growth rate has gone up, isn't it? The long-term growth rate, 6% or so, which is good news, which is also the case in Kerala, Maharashtra, Gujarat, except maybe UP, Bihar, and a couple of other states. And therefore, per capita income also has improved. But has it really been translated into welfare? That's the question. And in which I first look at employment, because employment is the means by which people and families can transform themselves in their standard. When I do that, what I find is, as in other states, Orissa has also a major problem of declining women's participation. I won't call it declining women's participation, but increasing women's exclusion. Because when you put it as declining women's participation in the labor market, you think that they are unwilling to participate. No, there is no opportunity for them. So it is an exclusion of women from participation. So if you, of course, it has happened for India as a whole also, but it has also happened for Orissa in a very, stark way. I'll just give you, and I'm sure many of you will be working on this. So if you take the working age population, 15 to 59 years for women, 42% were in the workforce in 1983. That is 37 years ago. Today, 18-19 figures show they are 25% of the working age population. Workforce participation rate, which is a considerable decline. Of course, the Indian decline is also no less. In fact, the Indian decline is much more, from 47% in 83 to 24-25% today. Much sharper than Orissa. Kerala has a similar picture, but slightly better, from 45% to 29%. Now, the regional economies, I think whether you take Orissa or Kerala or Maharashtra. They also have a responsibility at the state level, because we have a federal system where there is a national government with much stronger financial powers and ability to spend. But we also have a state system where they also have powers of taxation, but a greater responsibility for implementation, not only their own programs, but also the central government sponsored programs, most of it, except with the pan-Indian service, issue spheres like railways, airlines, etc. Otherwise, any program, rural development program or health, education, these are all to be implemented by the states. So I think the states have a responsibility. And one of the main responsibilities is in giving them a measure of education. Now, people are equipping themselves. This is what we find from whether it is NSS or NFHS data, there is a general progress in education, in increasing the number of years of education. But there is a great uneven, even better. But I think the progress has to be acknowledged and accepted. And I would say this is because of the effort. If I give you an example for Orissa, in Orissa, in 1983, in the working age population of 15 to 59, because that is more comparable than taking 15 plus as a whole, that will include elderly also. So you limit yourself to 15 to 59, around 10% of the men had an education of at least a secondary level pass. In 83, that is 37 years ago. Today, it's around 38%, which is an interesting statistic, although the All India figures are somewhat better, from 16% to 47%. So there is a catch-up going on, and I think that needs to be accelerated. And in this respect, I would flag Kerala's is because of a longer period of educational process. You can call it a historical path dependency in this case. The Kerala men had 18% in 1983 with at least a secondary level pass. Now it is 59. But the women have done better, from 15%, which was lower than men in 1980, to 60% today. So my contention is, which I have said elsewhere also, given equal opportunity, for example, in education, our girls are likely to do better than our boys. So don't underestimate the inherent capability of people and their agency. It is because the society doesn't create them the favorable conditions, the context, the opportunities, and the level of empathy that they ought to get, that we are lagging behind. So while we can speak in terms of the pure economics of education, but I think education transcends much more than economics. Because if you look at educated unemployment, it's very high, whether it is Orissa or Kerala. Kerala has much more higher unemployment. That doesn't mean that people are discouraged from getting education, because education has a much larger role to play, isn't it? Not just, of course, it is important for employment and functioning in the economic sphere, but it has a larger role in the family, in taking care of the children's health is is dependent on the mother's education, because then only she can handle how to take care of them, and also the family profile and how you conduct yourself, the question of human dignity. All these comes right from your birth and mostly from your mother, because the mother is the most attached person in the child's life. So as Amartya Sen said, that these capabilities, they have an economic function, an instrumental value, but they also have an intrinsic value. I think we need to take lessons from these, and we need to, and I greatly appreciate your effort in having an Orissa Economic Journal, because that gives an opportunity for people to study more on the regional economy. And I know Orissa has progressed quite a bit, especially in terms of handling its disasters, which is a major event. I don't think Kerala is as prepared as Orissa in terms of institutions to handle disasters, probably because of the experience of Orissa in last 20 years or so. But the catching up process has to be accelerated. And as economists, I would always question our this unbridled focus on the growth. Growth for what? Every stage we have to ask ourselves, growth for what? And does it really translate itself into generalized welfare, human development, and capabilities, and a societal transformation that we all want? And I think you have a very generous and reputed list of economists, and you read through your past presidents and all that. And a lot of younger generation are coming into the profession. So in that sense, you have a lot of people who are capable of studying the process of economic development from a regional perspective. I think our understanding, if we enhance our regional and understanding of regional economies in India, we would be doing a much greater service than everybody focusing on the national. Because national, again, that national average doesn't have much of a meaning. National average is a weighted average of well-performing and not so well-performing regions, isn't it? So apart from the rural-urban, we also have a burden of the interstate regional inequality issue in India. And if you go by the literature, just as rural-urban inequality has widened, regional inequalities have also widened, isn't it? So I think we need to bring back the question of inequality in its manifold sense to the center stage. And we have a social responsibility to convey our results to the society at large. I will stop here, and once again, I want to thank all of you and for being kind in inviting me and giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kannan, for your thought-provoking insights, evidence-based research presentation on Indian economy. You have explored and linked your deliberations on manifold inequalities in the context of migrant workers, poverty-stricken population, rural-urban economy, the relevance of enabling an environment in the perspective of existing glaring inequalities, and ultimately to economic growth. Thank you very much, sir. So now I would like to request Srimati Jogeshwari Das, Registrar of Gangadhar Mahar University, to make an introduction on the President of OEA. Jogeshwari Mahar.
Thank you, sir. Honorable President, Secretary, Odisha Economics Association, Honorable Vice Chancellor of this institution, esteemed Chief Guest, PG Council Chairman, Organizing Secretary, Head of School Economics, Gangadhar Mahar University, all executive members of Odisha Economic Association, distinguished guests, students, participants joined in virtual mode. It's my privilege to welcome all to this 54th annual conference of Odisha Economic Association. In fact, this is a very rare privilege that after 22 years, Gangadhar Mahar University is the host institution for this annual conference. So, on behalf of Gangadhar Mahar University, I extend my heartiest thanks to the President and Secretary Odisha Economics Association for giving this opportunity. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Professor Suryanarayan Tripathi, President Odisha Economics Association, who has been in the active field of economics for more than 4 decades. In addition to his LLB degree, he was awarded PhD, postdoctorate, DLET, degree in economics for the works of bonded labor in Odisha and tribal migration in KBK district of Odisha. He is a well-known researcher, prolific author, and 58 books are at his credit. His research works comprehensively based on rural and tribal development, labor problems, and Gender Studies. He has published 200 research papers in various journals, guided dozen of research scholars for their PhD degree in Berhampur University and Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. He has served as Professor Economics at Mahatma Gandhi Labour Institute, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. We are glad to have such a dynamic professor as President, Odisha Economic Association. He will give his presidential address on dynamics of social inclusion of particularly vulnerable tribal groups, PVTG, in Odisha. Evidence from 3 districts. This research-based talk will definitely be helpful and provide food for thoughts for the teachers, scholars, and researchers who have undertaken tribal studies. So thank you so much, sir. On behalf of Gangadhar Meher University, once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jogeshwari Madam. Honorable Professor N. Nagaraju, the Vice Chancellor, Gangadhar Meher University, Sambalpur. Respected Chief Guest Professor A.P. Kanan, LB Center for Visitor Studies and former Director, Center for Development Studies, Thiruvananthapuram. Keynote speakers, Professor M. Suresh Babu, IIT Madras, Professor E. Noringa from NS University, Rotterdam, Dr. Uma Charanpati, Organizing Secretary, Gangadhar Meher University, Dr. Amarendra Das, Secretary, Orissa Economic Association, senior professors, distinguished colleagues and friends. I feel honored to address you today as the President of Orissa Economic Association in this 54th annual conference organized under the patronage of Gangadhar Meher University, Sambalpur, Odisha. I express sincere thanks to all the members of Orissa Economic Association for electing me as the President of Orissa Economic Association for this conference. This year, the topics selected for deliberations are COVID-19, Indian economy and economic recovery. Number 2, innovation system and inclusive development. I am optimistic that the deliberations of the selected themes will be fruitful for policy implications. However, I have selected the topic for my presentation on dynamics of social inclusion of particularly vulnerable tribal groups in Odisha, evidence from 3 districts. My discussion is distributed into 4 sections. Section 1 deals with introduction and the demographic features of particularly vulnerable tribal groups in Odisha. Section 2 highlights the inclusion of particularly vulnerable tribal groups to the mainstream of development, objectives and methodology of the study. Section 3 presents the comprehensive analysis pertaining to social inclusion of selected particularly vulnerable tribal groups, namely Bigai tribe, Uttarakhand and Huon tribe, selected from 3 districts of Odisha, and Section 4 explores the conclusion and the suggestions of the my God.
सर देखा जाऊँगी सर शेयर है वाला
is it visible?
Maximize your jump, sir.
Going down the slides.
As you know, the tribal population of India, as per 2011 census, is 10.43 crores, constituting 8.6% of the total population, out of which 89.97% of them live in rural areas and 10.03% in urban areas. Odisha has 62 culturally vibrant tribes, including 13 primitive tribe groups, who are found sprinkled all over the state. There are some groups who are known as particularly vulnerable tribal groups, characterized as homogeneous groups with small population, physically isolated, low literacy level, adopting simple technology with stagnant and diminishing population, and are less developed and more vulnerable among scheduled tribes. More than 80% of population of particularly vulnerable tribal groups inhabits in Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Tamil Nadu, Tripura, and Chhattisgarh. The primitive tribes living in interior pockets and inaccessible places are becoming vulnerable to hunger, starvation, malnutrition, and lack of education, economic progress, and are having low health indices. Out of 75 primitive tribes identified in India, 13 vulnerable tribal groups are identified in Orissa, and those are namely Bonda, Birhar, Chuktiya Bhunjia, and Gaudiya Kant, Jidai, Hilkhoria, Juango, Kutia Kant, Lodha, Lanjia Shora, Mankedia, Pauri Bhuya, Shaura. So these tribes are in accordance with instruction of Government of India. 17 micro project agencies have been established in Odisha during the period 1976 to 1994 in the phases are providing special attention to their all-round development. These micro projects are in 12 districts, which are Malkangiri, Rayagada, Angul, Devagad, Anjam, Nuapada, Keonjhar, Sundargarh, Kastuti, Kalandi, and Mayurbhanj, spread over 20 blocks, 84 gram panchayats, covering 1,019 villages of the state. The government of Odisha announced the inclusion of 888 left out villages in the list of primitive tribal groups on 9th June 2020. So there are slides pertaining to the population of each vulnerable tribal groups, but I have omitted that, and I am coming to the vulnerable tribal groups and their population as per 2011 data, which is presented in this table. It is revealed that the vulnerable Saura tribe constitutes the highest number of population, that is 5,34,751, followed by Kharia vulnerable tribe group with 2,32,844 population. This table depicts the literacy rate of 13 particularly vulnerable tribal groups in Odisha, residing in 17 micro projects areas. It is found that the female literacy among the Jidai vulnerable tribal group is the lowest, that is 2.99%, followed by Bonda vulnerable tribal, which is 4.7%, whereas the vulnerable Saura of Chandragiri in Gadapudi district has the highest female literacy of 26.88%. The overall particular vulnerable tribal group female literacy is extremely low. Regarding Didai particular vulnerable tribal group, male literacy is the lowest, that is 12.4%, followed by Monda vulnerable tribal group, that is 17.5%, whereas the Saura particularly vulnerable tribal group of Chandragiri district, Chandragiri and Gaudapati district had the highest male literacy of 60.96%. This vulnerable tribal group and their population of the study, we have taken two important objectives. One is to portray briefly about the Didai tribe of Malkangiri, Juanga tribe of Keonjhar district, and Kutiakan tribe of Kandhamal district in Odisha. And the second objective is more crucial because it examines the extent of social inclusion based on employment and work, income and economic resources, material resources, education and skill, reproductive, maternal, newborn and child health, housing, social resources, community resources, personal safety, and financial inclusion of these three selected primitive tribal groups covering 3 districts of Orissa. With regard to the methodology, we have taken both primary and secondary sources of data. Primary data are obtained from 100 households under each category of sampled out particularly vulnerable tribal groups. However, 5 additional households were taken from the Didai group, and in aggregate there are 305 households. And secondary data were taken from multiple sources and mainly from Juanga Development Agency, Kutiakan Development Agency, and Didai Development Agencies. And the sampling criteria for villages was covered by taking into consideration 3 nearby villages and 3 distant villages from the block headquarters. From each selected villages, households are selected on the basis of simple random sampling technique from the list of beneficiaries obtained from the micro-project agencies. From Tumdiwant in Kandhamal district 100, from Bansipal in Keonjhar district 100, from Pokarunda and Khairiput in Malkani district 105, all aggregate 305, covering 19 villages of 3 micro agencies, project agencies. So now, with regard to the Didai tribe, which is selected from the Malkangiri district, we have just briefly introduce what is Didai. Didai is one of the vulnerable tribal group found in the hilly terrain, mainly concentrated in Kudu, Kuluguma and Khairiput block of Malkangiri district of Odisha. Didai is one of the most deprived, economically backward and vulnerable tribes, which with low level of educational, pre-agricultural technology and insecure and declining livelihood opportunities. They have been surviving in the midst of ecological and geographical hazards and socio-economic impediments and backwardness. In course of time, they develop appropriate coping mechanism to eke out their living under peculiar and disadvantaged situation. The Government of India provides 10% special grants for the all-round development of tribal communities through operationalization of micro projects. Didai communities reside in 37 villages located in 3 distinctly marked sub-areas of Malkangiri district of Orissa. Didai population number 3,055 in 1971 increased to 5,471 in 1991 and to 7,371 in 2001 and finally to 8,890 in 2011. The data collected from statistical profile of Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India. Then with regard to Kutiakans, they are languishing in the very fragile conditions of poverty and deprivation, more vulnerable to food insecurity, health problems and malnutrition, are found largely in Kottagad and Tumdibank and Belgar blocks of Ballyguda subdivision in Kanwal district. They collect various non-timber forest produce items like honey, gum, bamboo, shrubs, quail wood, dry leaves, nuts, medicinal plants, roots, etc. The main occupation of Kutiakans is agriculture, horticulture, shifting cultivation, minor forest collections, livestock rearing, wage earning, small business, artisan work, etc. The Kutiakan Development Agency is located at Belgaur in Kanwal district with the objective of serving the poverty-stricken, marginalized, limited to tribes of Kutiakan through the implementation of diverse schemes like special central assistance for development of infrastructure, income generating and educational development of the community. According to baseline survey 2015, the total population of Kutiakan were 6,332, out of which 3,029 were males and 3,303 were females. Then here to Juangos, they are an aboriginal tribe mostly found in Kaunza district in North Orissa. Their settlement are scattered hidden inside hills. The poverty-stricken Juangos are targeted by nearby villages of the plain areas. The Juangos encounter resistance from the non-Juangos for the use of common property resources and the protection of their forest. The traditional use and exchange of forest resources like timber, bamboo, firewood have been disrupted. They are proficient in basket making and exchange their basket for salt, oil, food, money from the village traders, which are in demand in nearby guest villages. With the declining forest resources and fragile ecosystem, the Juango organized engaged mostly in agriculture and wage earning as a source of living, and in times of natural hazards, they are prone to starvation. They are more vulnerable to food insecurity, health problems, and malnutrition, and their socioeconomic and educational status are comparatively worse than other tribal communities. To take into consideration of the development, the Juanga Development Tribes Agency has been established by Government of India, covering 6 Gram Panchayats, 35 villages of Panchayat Samiti at Manspal, which is functioning in Kaunza district since 1978, and the population was of 47,095, out of which 23,093 are males and 24,002 are females. So now we'll discuss about the social inclusion of these tribes to the mainstream of the economy. The policy of economic empowerment is expected to enhance the capabilities of deprived groups, like particularly vulnerable tribal groups, to take advantage of the ongoing social economic progress. Apart from addressing the issue of inequality, the inclusive policy may also make the poverty reduction effort more effectively by explicitly creating productive economic opportunities for the poor, particularly vulnerable tribal groups and vulnerable sections of the society. Thus, the social inclusion is a process of improving the capabilities, prospects, and dignity of poor vulnerable tribes. These spheres of inclusion encompass employment and work, income and economic resources, material resources, education and skill, health, housing, social resources, community resources, and personal safety. So this is with regard to the demography of their population and size. The household composition of Bidai, Bukakang, and Juang is explained in this table, and that is in terms of average family size, average number of male and female members in the family. The average household size among the households of Kutiakang, Juango, and Bidai primitive tribes is found at 4.2, 4.0, and 4.7 members respectively. Compared to female members, there is slightly higher incidence of male members in all the particularly vulnerable tribal groups that was covered in this study. Table 6 is regarding the extent of social inclusion based on employment and work, income and economic resources. Compared to all economic dimensions and all ORISSA situation, the dependency ratio of all the three limited to tribal groups is higher, and hence they are more socially excluded. But they are more included in terms of work participation ratio, as they have diversity of occupations. Since their employment and their different activities are very limited, and income obtained from those sources are meager, so it shows that the work participation ratio is higher. The extent of social inclusion based on income and economic resources, taking into criteria of income and economic resources, Kutyakans and Juanga households are less included compared to the Dai group of households, which is evident from this table. Extent of social inclusion based on material resources. So we have calculated value of material assets households, percentage of households having mobile phones, their own television, households having motorcycles, and also it is compared with the all ORISSA data. On material resources, extent of social inclusion among the limited to tribal groups household is found lower. So extent of social inclusion based on education and skill. This table clearly shows that with regard to education and skill, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups households are comparatively less included. Extent of social inclusion based on reproductive material, newborn and child health. So institutional delivery as percentage to total delivery in the community among Kutyakan, Juang and the Didai household is found at 43.3%, 58.5% and 69.2% respectively. In the vaccination front also, the Didai households stand even better than the all ORISSA situation. This is the inclusion based on housing. We found that compared to the all ORISSA situation, the Pakka houses in Odisha limited to tribes households are less included. With regard to household facilities, the toilet facilities, it is found that Juango Hill households are very much socially included, which is not evidenced among the Kutyakan and the Didai households. This table explores regarding the sending of children to schools. It is found that Didai children are better, and regarding membership in the self-help groups, the particular vulnerable tribal groups are less socially included compared to overall situation prevailing in the state of Orissa. Extent of social inclusion based on community resources. It is found that the annual household income from the sale of minor forest produce and even income from livestock is better in case of Didai tribe compared to other two vulnerable tribes. So social inclusion based on personal safety. We have taken indicators on the basis of one is the ration card, another is a pension scheme, and we found that though only Kutyakan is less than the all ORISSA indicator, but even Juango, but Didai tribe is better compared to the ORISSA situation, and they are adequately included as compared to ORISSA situation, because most of the households are BPL category households. So in terms of the ration card, issue of ration card and pension scheme, they are found better. This slide shows regarding the saving behavior of three vulnerable tribal groups of Orissa. We found overall about 22.6% of the households keep cash in hands, which is higher among the Kutiakan households. About 57.7% households have made their savings in banks, followed by self-help groups and post offices. This reveals about the household's loan behavior. It is revealed that overall 28.5% of the particularly vulnerable tribal group households are indebted, which is found on the higher side with the Juango compared to Kutiakan and the Vidai households. So these were some of the parameters we have taken for the analysis of inclusion of particularly vulnerable tribal groups for their social inclusion. And there are a series of suggestions, but I have incorporated only a few of them. The micro project based intervention needs to give more priority to skill development instead of traditional focus on agricultural based livelihood promotion. The micro project agencies should ensure proper marketing of the handicraft items produced by the tribal groups. In the event of health emergency, the particularly vulnerable tribal people suffer a lot due to inadequacy of facilities, ambulance. There should be more ambulance facilities to address their problems. To overcome employment problems, the number of days of work per annum per household under Manarega-based wage employment opportunities should be further increased, which should be at least 180 days per annum. NABARD should extend its support through its Wadi project for generating employment and income in the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. There is a need for establishment of processing units of various minor forest produce and cottage industries. Moreover, building the capacity of tribal farmers in the sphere of crop development, horticulture, cereal food crops, including oilseeds, pulses, etc. in all programs villages will go a long way in ameliorating the socio-economic conditions of the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So now we can conclude that it has been observed that the benefits of development have not percolated to the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Rather, adversely affected their lifestyle, leading to the violation of human rights, miserable living standard of rights, restricted the community rights over natural resources and their own forest resources, and finally culminating into identity crisis of the tribes. The indiscriminate exploitation of natural resources by the non-tribes who dominate the government machinery in the tribal areas results in not only a threat to tribal survival, but it also leads to depletion of their resources in tribal regions. Hence, the development schemes and programs must be people-centered, eco-friendly, and hand in hand with the culture to make a significant dent into the development projects of particularly vulnerable tribal groups. It has been revealed from the respondent households that negligible incomes and a limited working of public food, nutrition and employment programs results in income vulnerability, failure to withstand the shocks like failure of crops, natural calamities, or health hazard, forcing them to seek alternative support when they need large infusion of cash. So in conclusion, we can say that inclusion of tribe into the non-tribal domain was predominantly aimed at are focused on economic exploitation of tribal people and their resources. Intentional or not, the tribal people lost their traditional authority over all economic resources, land, forest, and other resources. Several land reform policies, Land Acquisition Act, and even the Forest Right Act 2006 could not ameliorate their socio-economic conditions or supplementing their livelihood. So it is high time to think about the development of tribal groups who constitute 23% of Odisha's population, and unless their development is ensured, the economic development of Odisha will be jeopardized. Thank you all for your attention. So now, the next item is vote of thanks by Dr. Uma Tarunpati, the organizing secretary.
Sir. Sir, please stop sharing, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the School of Economics, Gangadhar Mehra University, we are thankful to Honorable President, Orissa Economic Association, Professor S.N. Tripathi, sir, President-elect, Professor Keshav Das, sir, Secretary, Orissa Economic Association, Dr. Amarendra Das, Assistant Secretary, Dr. Manoj Das, all the executive committee members, and all the members, live and annual members of the Orissa Economic Association for their cooperation. I take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. Nagaraju, sir, for being the inspiration behind all our academic programs. Sir has spared his valuable time. He is with us right from the beginning. We are thankful to our administrative team, headed by our registrar, Madam Srimati Yogeshwari Das, Professor Moin Mohammed, Chairperson, PG Council, COF, all the administrative staff members, all the heads of departments, all faculty members, non-teaching staff, those who have supported us in conducting this program. We are thankful to all of you. Our special thanks to the members of Syndicate Academic Council, Intelligentsia of Sambalpur, Government of Odisha, Department of Higher Education, local media for their support and cooperation. I must take this opportunity to thank on behalf of the GM University and on behalf of the Odisha Economic Association, our chief guest, Professor KP Kannan, sir, our keynote speakers, Professor Suresh Babu M from IIT Madras, Professor Peter Noringa from Erasmus University, Rotterdam, Dr. Devaprasad Rath, OIC, Economic Policy and Division, Reserve Bank of India, Mumbai. I must take this opportunity to thank all the chairpersons and discussants, those who are associated with our today's conference. I must take their name, Professor Mitali Chinara ma'am, Professor Badrinarayan Rath, Professor Dharmabrata Mahapatra, Professor Chandrasekhar Bahinipati, Professor Sanjukta Das, Professor Sitakanta Panda, Professor Himanshu Raut, Professor Amalendu Jyotisi, Professor Sudhakar Patra, Professor Minoketan Behera, Professor Shivasankar Mahanti, Professor Vikas Ranjan Misra, Professor Hemanta Kumar Pradhan, Professor Pavitra Kumar Jena, Professor Dukhabandhu Sahu, and Professor Vishnu Prasad Naik. Thank you very much. And a special mention here for the support and cooperation and constant efforts given by our technical team. I must take their name and thank them individually. Ms. Priyanka Swain, Ashish Patel, Chandan Sahu, Sushil Sahu, Yogeshwar Sahu, and all others, those who have supported us in our efforts. And finally, as the host of the 54th annual conference of the Orissa Economic Association, I should not thank, but I must mention the head of the School of Economics, Dr. Prabhati Panda, my colleague, Dr. Murlidhar Majhi, all the research scholars, all the students of the School of Economics. They deserve a special thanks from the organizing team. So thank you so much. Be with us. We are definitely going to make a mark in the economic sphere. Thank you very much. And we look forward to your cooperation in the days to come. And thank you, Orissa Economic Association. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I would like to thank Umapati sir for taking all the efforts for organizing such a nice seminar. And again, I would like to thank Professor K.P. Kannan. And in fact, since we have some time, I would just share some of my experience with Kannan sir. I still remember, in fact, when Kannan sir was telling that he would speak extempo, I was not surprised at all, because I still remember Kannan sir was presenting the Kerala Human Development Report when I was a student, and Center for Development Study has prepared that report. And Kannan sir was speaking without any papers, and he was speaking numbers. So I was thinking, how can somebody remember so many numbers by heart? And speaking without any PPT, without any notes, using numbers. That is one experience. Second, Kannan sir taught us again development economics in our class, and I remember the lecture on the comparison of growth of India, China, and Japan. So he just came with one table, and that he took some printouts, shared with all of us, and with that table he took the entire 1.5 hour lecture. Okay, and so that was so enjoyable class, and I still remember the way he interprets the numbers. And many of us are present here, and nowadays we use so much of econometrics and all that. But then if somebody has to learn how to interpret the numbers, I think a great deal we have learned from Kannan sir. And today we could see a glimpse of that, how he uses the numbers to speak, to tell the stories and the nuances. You see the interpretation that he made from the simple numbers, and how deep he goes into the numbers. So yeah, I would like to thank Kannan sir. We would have really loved getting you physically in Odisha and in Sambalpur, but that did not happen because of the COVID. And I hope we'll get a chance in future. So I was feeling like again sitting in the classroom during my MPhil days, and listening to all of you, and I think others also got this opportunity. Okay, so thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation in a very short notice, as you told also. And but like I also told that how you accepted us, because we are the alumni and again students request. So thank you very much. And again, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Sambalpur University, and the head of the department, and all the faculty members for organizing this event such a nicely. And again, the Honorable President of Orissa Economics Association, Sujanaran Tripathi, for his detailed deliberation on the tribal issues in Odisha. Thank you very much, sir. So I think with this, we will conclude this session, and we'll move on to the next session. We have some time, 5 minutes, and so by this time we prepare, and then yeah. So I would invite, I think probably we can go to the next session directly if the organizers will allow. We may invite the chairperson of the next session. We will have the plenary session, and for the theme 1. So over to you, Umapati sir. Yeah. So
Yes, we are ready, sir.
Yes.
So the first plenary session, I request the chairperson, Professor Uday Shankar Mishra sir, and from our side, for the introduction of chairperson, introduction of speaker, we have my departmental colleague, Dr. Muldhar Maji, to conduct that. And we are going to have Professor Suresh Babu M. Sir from IIT Madras for the keynote address. So I welcome all of you to the first plenary session. And now I hand it over to the chairperson, Professor Uday S. Mishra Sir. We are waiting for permission from Professor Uday Mishra Sir.
Yes, Dr. Pati, go ahead.
Okay, sir. Now I request Dr. Muldhar Maji, my departmental colleague, to introduce our chairperson and also introduce the chief speaker, Dr. Maji.
A very good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the School of Economics, Gangadhar Meher University, Sambalpur, and Orissa Economics Association, I, Dr. Muralidhar Maji, welcome you all to the first plenary session of this 54th virtual annual conference of Orissa Economics Association 2022. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Uday Shankar Mishra Sir, the chairperson of this first plenary session. Professor Mishra is known to everybody for its academic excellence and sharp analytical idea in deciphering the root of a problem. Professor Mishra got its higher education degree of MA Statistics from Sambalpur University and MPhil and PhD degree in Population Studies from the Indian Institute of Population Sciences, Mumbai. His area of specialization includes population policies, program evaluation, gender and health issues, and issues relating to human development. Professor Mishra has a long experience of teaching of 30 years in various capacities, starting from research executive to the post of professor at CDS Trivandrum. Professor Mishra has a series of publications in various journals of national and international repute. He has authored and co-authored many books with an array of book reviews and published communications. Professor Mishra has also guided 10 number of PhD scholars with more than 20 number of scholars for accord of MPhil degree. Besides conducting various research projects funded by both national and international agencies, he has also worked as an active member of more than 11 number of professional and technical institutes around the globe. Currently, he is working on the male education and conceptualizing a household educational indicator. With all this, he is also an alumni of erstwhile GM College or currently GM University Sambalpur. And thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to share your valuable time with us. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker of this session, Professor Suresh Babu M., Professor of Economics, IIT Madras, to this August online gathering. Professor Babu obtained his master's from Pondicherry Central University and got his MPhil and PhD degree from the prestigious JNU, New Delhi. His area of interest includes applied macroeconomics, industrial economics, trade and development. Professor Babu is having an expertise on teaching at various institutes of national repute and member of various forums of Government of Kerala as well as Government of India. Professor Babu has a series of publications in various journals of national and international repute also. Besides presenting in-depth and analytical papers in various forums, he has also conducted many research projects of Government of India. Professor Babu has guided number of scholars for PhD and MPhil degree, and currently he is guiding 3 scholars basing on the topic, the area, state finances and corporate governance. Being a good speaker on various timely issues, Professor Babu has a series of popular writings on the contemporary issues in Financial Express newspaper. Dear sir, personally, I am very fond of reading your articles from that newspaper. In the present context of COVID-19 pandemic, the central government has released financial packages of tranche 1 to tranche 5 through Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme. And we are in a gloomy situation of viability gap funding for social infrastructure. As today you are with us, we'll be able to hear from you in this regard, sir, with the keynote address on the topic entitled Decoding Post-COVID-19 Economic Growth, Its Responses and Prospects. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to share your views with us. Thank you. Now, over to Professor Udayshankar Mishra, sir, the chair of the session, to manage the proceedings. Over to Professor Mishra, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maji, for this introduction, and good afternoon to all of you. In fact, it is a very interesting inaugural session, and the setting tone to this conference has been the beautiful talk by Professor K.P. Kannan. Let me begin this plenary session and welcome Professor Suresh Babu. I'm very proud of my own first batch student whom I taught at Center for Development Studies, Professor Suresh Babu. His contribution in these few years being an academic has been extraordinary. In fact, it gives me great pleasure to be chairing a session which is to be delivered by Professor Suresh Babu. He has been an alumni of Center for Development Studies, currently at the IIT Madras Humanities and Social Science Department. In fact, at the very outset, I must thank him for accepting our offer to speak on this topic. And when we decided the theme of the conference, it was none other than him who was found suitable to speak on a topic like COVID-19, post-COVID pandemic growth. And he's going to speak on the exact title of his talk is Decoding Post-COVID Economic Growth Responses and Prospects. Besides the introduction of his academic credential, I must say that as it was mentioned by the introduction of him, that he has been actually making beautiful popular writing in recent times, which are quite catchy and informative. In that regard, Professor Babu, we can expect to hear on this particular topic, which is the first plenary talk of this conference. Without taking much time, I would just say that, in fact, despite being a virtual platform, till now, from the morning, I don't find any disruption, and it's great. Thanks to Dr. Pati for conducting it in a beautiful manner. And I'm really excited that although I miss that I could have visited my own hometown, I could have visited my own alma mater where I studied graduation. I do miss them, but it's quite lovely to see that till now things have gone so smooth and quite well conducted. Organizers, hats off to you. Good job. So having said that, I welcome Dr. Suresh Babu without taking much more time to hear him, and I hope it will be a beautiful lecture again to set the conference going. Thank you very much. Welcome, Suresh, please.
Thank you. Afternoon. Thank you very much. It's indeed a privilege for me on many counts to have this lecture. As Professor Mishra was just, remembering, I'm one of his very early students at the Center for Development Studies when he was teaching us statistics. And also, it's also very difficult task once when you are in a session with some of your teachers and very senior colleagues. Professor Kannan has laid out the broad contours of perhaps the seminar itself. And then I can see Professor Das and other senior colleagues there. Well, what I shall do is I shall straight away get into the lecture and talk about post-COVID recovery in India and some of the implications of these emerging trends, though it's very early to really have a very clear view. Okay, so let me put up my slides on this. By the way, I am assuming that I'm audible, and you can see my slides.
Absolutely, absolutely, Suresh. Clear.
Thank you. Okay, so the title of the talk is basically decoding post-COVID economic growth, responses and prospects. I might actually talk less on the responses because already it's out there in the domain, and we have been debating and discussing about the responses, but I will give only a snapshot view of the responses. I shall spend a little time on the prospects of growth from a macroeconomic perspective and from its implications on long-term growth of Indian economy. Okay, so having said that, I have organized my talk on these 4 lines. Yeah, I shall talk about the shock. Some of the dimensions of the shock, and this I think I need to remind all of us that this was not a small shock that we had, because there is a kind of an euphoria that has set in now that the economy is recovering and we are really past this. But I just want to remind all of us the kind of shock that we experienced. Then I would spend some time on the policy responses to such a shock. I'll be very brief there. And then I'll talk about recovery, where I'll spend some time in terms of decoding the recovery and conclude with some prospects and fallout for the future. That's the broad kind of an agenda that I have set out. Okay. Now, this is the shock that I was mentioning of, and I think we need to keep reminding ourselves of this shock for a very simple reason, that in the memory of economists in India, some of the numbers just fly past, and this number should not fly past us that easily, because what I would call as the first COVID quarter, the economy shrank by 22.8%. Well, we see the first revision of this number now, and and the subsequent growth rates. This is a tremendous shock that the economy received. Okay, and when we look at it from a slightly disaggregated perspective, we find that compared to the previous quarter, the percentage change from previous year and quarter, here I'm putting only one quarter, we find that, well, a lot of sectors just shrank. For example, construction shrank by 50%, and trade, hotels, transport, and communications by 47%. I'm highlighting these two. I'll come back to it in a minute. But the overall picture is that of a very shrinking economy, which has taken a hit by the virus and the subsequent lockdown. Okay. Now, there is one green spot there, and that is agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, which I think will come back when we talk about growth recovery as well. Rest all sectors of the economy witnessed negative growth rates. Okay. If we go a little more further, we find that the percentage change in key indicators of production, as well as gauging the economy, all of that really shrank. Yeah. For example, commercial vehicle sales shrank by -84%, and passengers handled at airports shrank by -94%. And that's very, very understandable, because in an economy which had lockdown, we don't witness any kind of movement of people. And the implication of that is in the so-called service sector of the economy, which contributes to a large share of India's GDP. Okay. So what I want to do is basically to remind of us of the magnitude of such a shock. Now, when we look at these numbers a little more closely, what we find is that in terms of gross value added by different sectors, barring agriculture, which grew, that's very important to see that, all sectors of the economy saw their incomes fall. And that's very, very important. Construction, hotels, manufacturing, mining. And these are the major employment generating sectors in the economy. All of that saw a shrinking in terms of output. Now, when these sectors actually are contracting so sharply, in terms of their output and incomes falling, well, outcome is very, very straightforward. More and more people would lose jobs. There will be a decline in employment, and many more people will find it very difficult to get jobs which means that there will be a rise in unemployment, and we really need to decipher these two effects separately. And this is a problem which we'll have to tackle. And again, towards the end, I will highlight some issues in this. Okay. Now, when these numbers were put out, actually, the quantum of decline, seems to have surprised many. It should not have, because kind of shock was tremendous on the economy. Why? Because the first lockdown curtailed nearly 2/3 of the GDP, and this proportion actually varied because we still, have lockdowns and lockups or whatever we call. And then until recently, a large section of GDP was actually locked down in a phased manner. So the economic trajectory going forward will be affected by the wealth and income losses of these past months. And we find that a large number of activities in the informal sector, where there is no consistent data available, itself has been shut down. And the implications of that perhaps is not reflected in these numbers that I have just put out. Why? The simple reason that we don't have a consistent series of data on that. Problem number two, GDP data in India itself is prone to large revisions. Nagaraj has written extensively about that, the problems in terms of measurement as well as calculation of GDP. And it's an estimate basically. And these estimates are subject to various rounds of revisions, right? And we can get a clear picture only after 2 years. But in terms of assessing the magnitude of COVID, we can't wait for 2 years because we need policy responses that are immediate. So there is a problem there in terms of data availability. Yeah. Very importantly, the data that I just showed, that is quarterly GDP calculations, rely on less hard data that is available. A lot of it is overstated perhaps, which means that the -22 itself can be an overstatement. It could be even worse than this. Okay. Now, viewing it from a slightly different perspective, just to understand the intensity of this shock. From a global perspective, if we look at the economies that have been shrunk by the pandemic, we find that India witnessed the largest shrinking. Yeah. And it's very interesting that China had a growth of 3.2% the same quarter. India's economy shrank by -23.9%. And if we look at USA, which is now registering a phenomenal rebound and bounce back, they had only shrunk by -9.1%. Right? In fact, UK, which had -21%, is also revived or has been on the recovery path for some time. So just to put this into a global perspective, we had a kind of a shock which was unprecedented. Forget about the emerging economies, even in the context of the so-called developed economies. Now, from a slightly different perspective, to see the magnitude of this whole issue, if you compare economic growth in Q2 of 2020 and COVID deaths per million population, again, we find that India has been affected very badly, right? For example, to look at, some of these economies, leave out China, Vietnam, even Sri Lanka for that matter, in the initial phase at least, economic activity did not take such a big hit. What more surprising is that COVID deaths per million population was also very low. We were actually really worse on both accounts. The pandemic hit us, the economy was also put under stress. Now, when we see this whole impact of lockdown as well as COVID on the economy, we need to take a slightly long-term perspective. Why? For a very simple reason that perhaps the slowdown of the economy had started much earlier. So here we are having a double kind of a shock. On one hand, there is an economy which is slowing down for some time. And this economy, which has been slowing down, is now subjected to a hit from an external agency. That's a COVID. So we find that, well, if you look at the long-term GDP story since liberalization of 1991, we find that in the last 4 years, perhaps, the graph is actually moving southward. Yeah. And on an average, our growth rate for this entire period, we can put it at 6.8%, with some years having phenomenal rates of growth of 9 or even touching the double digits. Those were the years when we thought that we could actually overtake China, for example. And from then on, we find that growth has been plummeting. And there is a problem here now because it is this economy that has been subjected to such a severe shock. Okay. So I think now I don't need to really push the story of how it has affected the economy. I think these numbers really reveal the story of that. When we look at the policy responses towards this, well, there have been two major approaches that we find. One is basically relying on RBI to support the economy. That is, instead of the government itself taking a direct measure in terms of a fiscal push to the economy, what the policymakers did was take an indirect route, leaning on the RBI, provide credit facilities, enable agents to access credit facilities, utilize that window and revive the economy. That's on one kind of it. Second kind of a policy response has been, well, go back to the earlier form of an import substituting industrialization. I know I'm making a slightly stronger kind of a remark there, because if we see the package of Atmanirbharata, we find that is actually going back to a slightly different version of the import substituting industrialization.
Sorry for interruption. To make it full screen, it will look better if you make it.
Give me a minute. Let me try that.
Yes.
Is it okay?
Yes, this is much better. Yes. Thank you so much.
So broadly two kinds of policy responses. Basically, in terms of a monetary channel, revive the economy, and on the trade front, we find that we are reviving this whole import substituting industrialization under a new garb of Atmanirbharata. Now, to come to the second point in terms of Atmanirbharata, what we find is that, well, if you look at the cumulative increases in tariffs that India has undertaken over a period of last 3 years, we find that we have had 2,000 times we have revised the tariffs of various commodities. This is unprecedented in recent times. And to cap it all, we find that we are actually going back to this import substituting industrialization now. So here is a swing of the pendulum. An import substituting industrializing economy, move to an export oriented economy, try to encash on this whole process of globalization. Now we find that we need to move back to import substituting industrialization, but with a different kind of a model now. So broadly, then the policy responses are of these two approaches. What is the problem here? The problem here is that financial penetration in India has been really scanty in certain regions, not in all regions. We have made tremendous progress in terms of financial penetration in certain areas. But still, there is unbanked. Still, kind of access as well as utilization of financial institutions is really uneven across the economy. So, monetary steps are likely to have very limited impact. One, two, whatever impact it has would also be uneven, because those people who have accessed these monetary steps will be gaining, and those people who have been unable to access would have been left out of this whole packages. And that's very important because it has important implications on the evolving nature of inequality in the economy. Okay. So two questions that came up during this entire period of reforms in the COVID times. Yeah. One, is it time for a big bang fiscal push to generate growth and employment? Two, given that the government does not have a fiscal space for a big push, how can this space be created? Can we create some space and then have this big push? Right. The challenge of the government was, I would say, was less of a lack of fiscal space and more of a central government's worry about large schemes, designing large schemes, implementing large schemes. In fact, there have been a lot of worries about MNREGA itself. We find that in terms of allocations to that, and there's a general kind of a worry about this centrally sponsored large schemes. One. Second, there's also a kind of a feeling that many of the areas that require investments are state subjects. So there's a kind of a fiscal friction that started to arise. Why should the center really pump in money where the investments are under the state subjects? Please remember, this is not a time to really have such kind of a fiscal friction, right? What emerged out of such a situation was a kind of a lack of trust between the center and the states on what are the kind of leakages that could come, and then there will be conditional allocation to states or unconditional allocation to states. And a classic example of that, I would say, would be this entire mess of vaccination campaign in the first phase, where initially the center started it, then states were asked to take over, then center took over. There was a whole kind of a confusion around that. And that's why I would say that there was a fiscal friction and there was lack of trust. Now, this is resolvable. It's not a big kind of an issue. Fiscal federalism in India has always had some kind of friction or the other. And we also have very successful schemes that have been run by the center. But then that needed a different kind of a policy approach. Perhaps government actually stops short of having such an approach. And that had major implications. Okay. Now, let us look at this clamor for fiscal push. That is a second kind of a major argument. That is, it is time that the center increases its spending. Were the resources for the center? The center or the union government at that point in time kept on repeating that the resources are limited. With the limited resources and with tax collection not really having a very kind of a positive outlook for the quarters to come, we need to spend the resources more judiciously. There were two possibilities to raise funds. One, internal sources. This issue bonds to raise resources. And at that particular point in time, we all know that RBI had so much of liquidity in terms of repo deposits of the banks. We did not utilize that perhaps. Two, there were external sources because inflow of foreign funds did not stop to India even at the time of the crisis of COVID. Still, we were getting a lot of foreign funds. So global interest rates being very low, perhaps that could have been another possibility. So perhaps the argument that resource non-availability of the center really have a very, very small fraction of fiscal push is not a kind of an argument to have in this kind of a crisis. Okay. What could have been a possibility? The possibility of the center could have been to spend more and increase its fiscal deficits. And the center not to choose that, even though it was forced to spend. And right now, we are on a very smooth kind of a fiscal glide path, which we are aiming to achieve by 24-25. But even if we had spent a little more at that point in time, well, we would have taken a little longer time for this fiscal correction process. And there have been studies that have shown that financial year 30 would have really recouped in terms of fiscal correction. So it would not have created such a major deterioration on the fiscal balances of the government. For example, if we had some kind of an intent in terms of increasing the tax buoyancy and some kind of a political will to push the power sector reforms, perhaps by 2030, we could have still had a kind of a prudent fiscal deficits, even after spending much more during this whole crisis. So there's a possibility or an alternative that was existing, which perhaps the center did not. Okay. Well, that takes us to the next kind of a pitch, that is, things are on a recovery path now. Whatever said and done, whether it was a kind of a RBI-led policy that led to the recovery of the economy, or not is a matter of debate. Recent highlights of Ministry of Finance monthly economic review shows that economy is back on track. Well, this review claims that India achieves full recovery of pre-pandemic output level by 21-22. And we find that exports are buoyant, right? Comfortable liquidity in the financial system, and manufacturing is slightly recovering. So economy is back on a recovery path according to this document. Let me just highlight 2 or 3 important issues in the document. One, this document claims that India is among the few countries that have recorded 4 consecutive quarters of growth amid COVID-19. Q3, Q4 of financial year 21 and Q1 and Q2 of financial year 22. And this, the government says, is the resilience of Indian economy. If India is to continue this, India would become the fastest growing economy in the world. Second, as per the official data, 19 out of 22 high frequency indicators have crossed the pre-pandemic levels. So economy is back on track. So the claim is now that India has not only caught up with the pre-pandemic output levels of Q2, but also is expected to do the full year, not only for a quarter, for the entire fiscal year. So there is a general feeling that we have bounced back. Perhaps we have bounced back to regain the position of fastest growing economy in the world. What is this optimistic estimate? Optimistic estimate is that GDP will expand by 8.4%, and in September quarter it expanded by 8.4%. We have slightly higher expectations, 9, 9.3, 9.4, 9.7. And this expansion would be led by 2 factors. On the demand side, well, exports and investments are likely to pick up. And on the supply side, we will bank on agriculture. And agriculture will continue to perform other sectors. And manufacturing and construction sectors are slowly picking up. A combination of these would actually increase the whole growth rate. So GVA from gross value added from agriculture, gross value added from manufacturing and construction would increase. So overall growth rate would pick up. Okay. I want to highlight one point here, that perhaps this slowdown and recovery of growth in COVID era highlights the importance of agriculture sector. What we find is that agriculture sector has been the foundation on which the economy has really recovered post contraction. Speed of recovery was also aided by agriculture sector. That's a major kind of an issue that we need to keep in mind. It was not the services. Services actually had to shut down, and still services are limping back. Agriculture provided the resilience. Some of the core sectors slowly started to show up, and this was because of basically some public investments through infrastructure development, and we see the reflection of that in cement production as well as in terms of natural gas, etc. Index of industry production continues to increase, but it continues to be volatile as well as cyclical. So we can't really give or bank on manufacturing sector in terms of reviving growth and sustaining this in the post-pandemic era as well. Given this in, what is the prospects now? Well, writing is clear on the wall that major engines of growth have faltered. Right? If you look at expenditure by individual consumers, has declined by 27%. If you look at expenditure or investment by private businesses, has declined by 47%. Government expenditure has an increase of only 16%. And that's the debate which we have been just talking about. Exports and net demand from that is slightly high for a simple reason that imports contracted. So the net exports would be higher. Imports contracted because domestic demand also contracted. So on the whole, we find that the engines of growth, that is expenditure by individual consumers and expenditure by private businesses, are in red. Given that, well, this kind of a recovery that the government is projecting is a very difficult path for the economy. So what do we see from these prospects? Well, we see globally that emerging markets experiences deeper and steeper recessions. For various episodes of recessions that have been studied globally, we find that industrial economies come out of recessions, they go to recessions, but they also come out of recessions very fast. The emerging market economies, once when they enter recessions, take a long duration to come out. These recoveries of emerging markets are also uneven, are slow, and they are volatile. And that's a complication that India will also have to face. Now, there is also one element of uncertainty that comes into these recoveries. That is, there is a large quantum of volatile global capital flows which affects this kind of recoveries. The coming in and going out of these volatile capital flows can actually lead to sometimes a deterioration in the macro indicators, and which actually opens up new issues to be tackled during a recovery phase. And that's perhaps one risk factor which we need to keep in mind when we talk about this optimistic recovery. I would say that fortunately we are better placed because of some kind of a conservative policy making, not in terms of opening the capital account and allowing capital come and go as and when we wish. Okay. So the pace of our recovery then would depend on the kind of policy support we are going to continue, not of immediate future, but in the medium term. So what is this whole shock that might unravel now? Well, we need to decipher two kinds of shocks here. One is a health shock, the other is an economic shock. And both combined has actually affected the population. In repeated lockdowns, and these repeated lockdowns have resulted in very, very volatile employment generation in the economy. Yeah, some months we find that unemployment rate is very low, according to CMI data, which I'll just put up in a minute. Some other months we find that unemployment is very high, okay, which means that incomes are also volatile. You have a pandemic to tackle, where families impacted by the pandemic had to fund treatment of their relatives who are sick, borrowing. This is very clear in terms of the data on borrowings that is put out by the Reserve Bank of India as well as corporate houses. When I say corporate houses, very interestingly, we find that one of the large borrow or lending agencies or private lending agency, financial agency, the Muthoot group sees enormous increase in terms of their profits as well as their volumes. That is being attributed to hedging of gold. So what we see is that the virus has really left deep scars on the economy, right? And the economy is lingering. Two immediate impacts which we had to tackle. One, small businesses have shuttered down, which means incomes are low. And we see that in terms of consumption. Second, economic uncertainty has gripped the economy, which means that in times of economic uncertainty, two important macro variables would also behave little erratic, and that is savings and investments in the economy. We find exactly the same. Savings have been eroded, investments have been uncertain. Of course, private investments in India have been slowing down for the last 5 years. This uncertainty is adding to that. Okay. Now, what will be the shape of things to come? I've been talking about a very bleak kind of a picture now. What will be the shape of things to come? And shape of things to come has been reduced to some kind of an alphabets of late. And there will be debate about this. What is this alphabet? Some say it will be a U shape. Some argue it will be a V shape, some W shape, and even A shape. And K is very interesting because we find that K will have one arm of K actually growing and the another arm of K actually coming down, which means that there is the possibility of widening inequality. In fact, IMF itself warned about this because they really argue that there will be an increase in income inequality, and this increased income inequality will further hurt the employment prospects because certain kinds of skills and certain kinds of jobs only would be available, which in the long run again widen income inequalities. So rising inequality will be a key characteristic of post-COVID growth in emerging economies and India in particular. And that's the point which I want to really emphasize. So what will be the manifestations of this? I will talk of three and conclude. One, question of unemployment. So Kanna was mentioning to this whole question of employment and the kind of problems that are likely to arise. Well, if you look at the State of India's working report, we find that 100 million people lost jobs during the lockdown. Nearly half of those in the formal sector have been pushed to the informal sector. Very, very serious implications. When we look at employment rate as an indicator of India's performance and compare globally, India has done so well. According to the World Bank data, global rate is around 55% in 2020 and 58% in 2019, and India records only 43%. Only the Middle East and North Africa is lower than India. And when we look at Bangladesh, it's 53, China, it is 63. Right? So it boggles the mind that India has such low employment rate. And that's a big challenge which we'll have to face in the post-COVID era. I'm not going much detail into this, but I want to highlight one aspect. That is, when we look at the CMI data, we find a very disturbing phenomenon coming out. That is, we find that there is an increasing share of discouraged workers in the economy. When I say discouraged workers, people who are willing to work but can't find jobs. So our usual unemployment rate is not actually capturing this discouraged workers. If we are to include discouraged workers also in terms of solving the question of employment, provide jobs into the economy, then it's a tall order because we will have to generate an additional 187.5 million jobs. Current order is around 480 million jobs. The ability of the economy to generate so many jobs will be the biggest challenge in the post-COVID era, and that we will have to see what kind of an implication it will have. Okay. Now, one more factor of this whole unemployment thing that I want to highlight is, according to CMI, whatever may be the limitations of the data, we can have discussions of that. There are a lot of concerns about how the survey is conducted, all these issues. But for lack of other sources of data, we are again going back to the CMI. Well, around 35 million are unemployed in December 2021. And the proportion of women in this is very high. And this is a point which Professor Kannan also highlighted. There's also another disturbing feature that a lot of people who are actively looking for work and not getting work are predominantly in their 20s. If you look at the demographic profile of these unemployed people, well, close to 85% of this are youth in their 20s now. And that's a kind of a worry in terms of India's long-term prospects. I'm not going more than this. Let me come to a related theme. That is the question of poverty. Again, when we look at data on poverty, we find that close to 230 million people earned less than $5 a day during this COVID crisis. And the impact on the informal sector is documented, and it has been devastating. Well, the incomes of salaried people fell on average by 40%. Others like small traders and other workers fell by 75%, according to NBR's one of the recent papers. So we find a situation where millions of Indians have slipped below poverty line now. Here there is a problem. We don't have, we will not also have long-term data to examine this. A simple reason that Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index does not allow intertemporal comparisons. Last sample survey, NSS sample survey on consumption expenditure was for 2011-12. So unless we have more data coming on this, the exact magnitude of this question of poverty is very difficult to decipher. PMI survey again shows that a combination of a health shock and a lockdown shock has pulled millions to the poverty line. Very interestingly, when we analyze CMI data, we find that, well, the urban has been hit badly more than the rural. There's a very interesting finding, this NBR paper by Arpit Gupta and all, that there is a rural-urban divide. And this time, it is the urban that has been hit very badly. When I say hit very badly, the percentage of population falling below poverty line in urban areas have been higher than the percentage of population falling below poverty line in rural areas. Okay. So this dimension then has to be tackled in the post-COVID recovery phase. There have been other studies which have documented the extreme situation of poverty in India. World Bank's document, Pew Research document. The Pew Research Center says that a number of people earning between $10 and $20 a day shrank to 66 million. So 2/3 have been now left out of this. And some of these are evidences which have to be really, looked more closely to have the kind of a clear picture and the kind of strategies we need to devise this recovery phase. Now, related theme of poverty and employment is the question of inequality. I just want to highlight only one issue here. That is, when we look at the World Inequality Report of 2022, India stands as a poor and unequal country than affluent elite. And this is exactly what I was mentioning when I was talking about the K-shaped recovery. Affluent elite, in terms of the corporate sector's profits as well as stock market profits, existing poor and a very unequal country. I'm not going to the numbers in terms of inequality. But the point is that when we look at two sources, World Inequality Report's data, and try and corroborate it with the multidimensional poverty index of the Niti Aayog, we find that it more or less goes together. Right? So there is hardly any debate in terms of this. Right. So now there are two issues that emerge in this whole growth recovery phase. Well, will this post-COVID recovery widen inequality or not? Well, we have the Kuznets-Tsushima hypothesis to that effect. Growth can increase inequality, but it depends on how inequality is defined first. One. It also depends on the pre-existing levels. I say pre-existing levels of inequality that was already existing in the economy before COVID. Right? Now, yes, COVID has resulted in loss of incomes. Did its impact vary across income layers? Has it been really in terms of differentiated impact across rural, urban? Well, this is something where we need little more evidence in terms of really understanding the trajectory of this recovery. If employment elasticity of growth isn't high, it was not high earlier also, and the labor force participation rate has been declining, especially for women, well, it's a part of a secular trend. So this COVID shock then has really affected that secular trend very badly. And we need to distinguish secular trend and this shock effect, get the magnitude of the impact then, right? There's a methodological issue that arises here. We can also interpret this K-shaped recovery along the lines of a calendar fascinating growth model. Distribution is very important. And here now, distribution of a different dimension assumes relevance. This wages and profits. Well, this time we can also look at the booming capital markets and labor markets. Here, one needs to be a little careful in terms of distinguishing between a stock and a flow, this wealth versus income, because when we talk of wealth, well, stock market valuation a good proxy of wealth or not is a debatable issue, but corporate profitability is. So very, very interesting and a fertile area now opens up in terms of distributional consequences of this particular kind of growth that we are witnessing now. Because this growth that we are witnessing now is also to be seen in light of the declining employment elasticity, composition of this growth, as well as increased capital intensity of the manufacturing. Because capital intensity of not only manufacturing, but also services. Yeah. Now, so I would now wind up. But before I really wind up, I will not be doing justice if I don't touch an important aspect of this crisis, that is education, and especially school education. And we find that there have been 5 areas in which there will be long-term damage that has taken place. One, we find that locked classrooms have resulted in close to 70% of the 10-year-old low and middle income countries unable to comprehend one simple text by the UNICEF. Second, lockdown and school lockdowns have really affected the mental health of students. Again, the UN report cites this. Mental health challenges have been doubled during the pandemic times. Third, the sheer issue of getting a meal in the school, which was stopped during pandemic time. And we know that India is home for one of the largest school feeding programs, and the pandemic have really worsened the nutritional status of our children then. There's also a kind of a divide that is now playing out in terms of access to technology when it comes to digital learning. The propagation of digital learning as a major medium through which education can be imparted has now led to unequal outcomes with certain people even not able to access this whole digital technologies. And there is a long-term impact of this closure of schools as well as other educational institutions. That is, when we reopen, we might find that a lot of children might not come back to schools. They might drop out. They might drop out because of the conditions which they have been pushed into after the pandemic. Let me conclude. Well, this whole recovery process, as well as the growth, green shoots of growth, whatever we call, that now we are witnessing, those are some very interesting questions. One, there is a need now to re-examine demand-driven growth models. And characterizing post-COVID growth, I think, will be more relevant with the use of more of a demand-driven post-Keynesian growth models, which are an alternative to the dominant solo swan growth model kind of a thing. This kind of a growth process also brings in relevance of Elder and Passanetti, argued important role of distribution. Perhaps, when Professor Kannan was talking about this obsession with growth, well, now it is time to bring in distribution as a very central theme if we are to really sustain whatever little momentum that we are gaining now. I also feel that there is an important role for Kuznets now, because we will have to look at growth inequality relationship slightly differently. So all in all, we find that there are very big challenges for young economies in terms of characterizing this growth process. There are huge data problems. I don't think we should really, deter ourselves from picking up some of these bold themes because of unavailability of data. And I'll stop with this quote from Kuznets, right? Where, this was deliberate in recognizing the limitations of both available data and theoretical ventures. He openly cautioned that no adequate empirical evidence is available for making his conjecture of that shape which he proposed. And he prefaced his concluding remarks with a caveat that the inverted U shape was based on perhaps 5% empirical information and 95% speculation. Some of it possibly hinted by wishful thinking. So young economists don't need to hold themselves back. We are taking on the bold themes now to have their research in terms of post-COVID growth. Evoking his genuine concern on the scientific enterprise, Kuznets argued that as long as his research is recognized as a collection of hunches calling for further investigation, rather than a set of fully tested conclusions, little harm and much good may result. I think it is time that we have a series of studies in terms of analyzing and understanding post-COVID growth in India. I'll stop here. If there are any clarifications or questions, I'll be very happy. Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Suresh, for a very, very brilliant talk, comprehensive, covering a wide landscape. And I would rather say that this
Sir,
is
please put video. Yeah, yes.
This is for the first time I should say that a speech, a talk by you, which is even if it expresses pessimism, but it expresses pessimism with evidence, because raw pessimism has no space. One of the things that impressed me a lot in your deliberation is growth implication to inequality. And in fact, everybody debates on that, and you had to give some theoretical underpinnings to that. But why I was impressed on that is because nowadays I am dwelling on something which is on inequality front, rather than expressing evidences on inequality or being disgusted with emerging inequalities which are coming up. I say that the given circumstance today of post-COVID, and as you yourself stated, the different kind of recovery approaches adopted, starting from fiscal to distribution to other things, and finally landing on that what is not becoming effective is lack of demand and generating demand. And that has been really a crucial hunch which is not till now solved or resolved, I would say. But one thing that is very important is that when you talk about this K-shaped inequality or K-shaped thing which will generate an inequality, it's actually recently I wrote somewhere on this very idea of accumulation. Who accumulates, when they accumulate, and why they accumulate. These three things are becoming very important. Not only that we are making the privileged more privileged, but also we are ensuring that accumulation is getting intensified. And the aspect of accumulation, when it gets intensified to this extent, there has to be some measure, whether in explicit or implicit terms, to reduce accumulation, to discourage accumulation. I would not say reduce, but discourage. And that is perhaps in the approaches adopted and visible to us doesn't seem to be there. And more than that, I would say that it is always better even if you say lack of data, in fact, I have been also writing on lack of data in this recent times. Lack of data is one thing, but I still remember a quote: it is better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. Even if we are dwelling with lack of data and concluding something, we may be still vaguely right and not precisely wrong. With this thing, I think I will open up it for the audience with a extensive talk with a lot of details. I would expect people to raise queries and questions if they have. Please. Yes, participants can raise questions if you have clarifications on any matter. Please.
Okay, sir, if I may ask one question.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Recently, I was reading in one IMF blog that in European countries, the saving rates have gone up significantly.
Yes.
But in India, no, you presume that saving rates might have gone down. So, like, how do we explain this difference that European countries, get more savings during this pandemic time, but we see a fall in the saving? So, what could be the reason?
Yeah, one of the important differences here is the if you look at the institutional breakup of savings, no, that is the breakup in terms of household savings, private corporate savings, government savings, etc. No, in India, when we look at that, we find that household savings have deteriorated,
yes.
Which is a large portion of our aggregate savings. Now, very interestingly, there have been some evidence to show that corporate savings have not declined that badly.
Mm.
In fact, corporate savings have declined less than corporate investments. Yeah. So the net effect of that what we find is that corporates now are showing a tendency to hold on to cash.
Yes, correct.
They're not investing because their investment decisions they are postponing in an uncertain environment due to lack of demand. Their savings have not been drastically declining. So the result of that is basically now we find this new phenomenon of corporates going and buying back shares of their own entities to increase their kind of equity stakeholdings in their own firms, kind of a. So the difference then between other advanced industrial economies and India's is the sheer composition of our domestic savings. And our the composition of domestic savings have been hit very badly because our incomes and employment were hit very badly. Not that the European countries' employment situation is much better than ours, but then the kind of a recovery path that they have is very different from the kind of a recovery path that we have. No.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, Dasababu.
No, I just I thought others might ask something. So I think it's excellent, absolutely brilliant presentation, and it touched on a very wide range of issues. So it was so much of a learning experience in it, I must say. So one small thing is, I mean, like you sort of identified, let's say, the three major sectors: the construction, trade and services, and manufacturing, also mining, for that matter. I mean, at least if you take construction and manufacturing, and construction in particular, which had a higher employment elasticity, I mean, in which we used to take pride, and to an extent, we also thought that manufacturing also is one sort of source where employment generation is possible, and both of these are very, very heavily hit, very negative, sort of like negatively affected. So my little worry is that what should be done, meaning like which sectors or subsectors or areas to be chosen so that we can sort of like, because employment is the central focus in both your talk as well as Professor Kannan's talk, and that job has to be sort of generated. So which areas? That is one sort of simple question. But the other thing is, which somehow I think because you are also an expert on technological issues, I thought You probably did not mention that it was not needed, I don't know. But I'm sort of wondering, even if you have some of these sectors really coming up with a major investment, but if those are going to be largely capital and technology intensive activities, so you may still have a higher growth, but the employment is not going to be generated. So we need a very different kind of a strategy. It is not just talking in terms of employment only through these sectors, because these sectors are also going, including the MSMEs for that matter. I mean, they are all going for more mechanization. So the sector might bounce back, but not the employment.
Yeah.
So some reflections on that.
Yeah. I think that's the most difficult one. That's a googly, because there is no answer for that. No. So the thing it does is that, well, this whole question of increasing capital intensity in manufacturing has been happening now. And we have been having some speculative kind of a thinking about automation and, the implications of automation, which are the sectors where it is going to be really hit and things of that sort. But see, when we look at the policy responses to that, I would say there have been two broad phases immediately after the shrinking of the economy. In the first phase, we had a lot of optimism that India could become the next major destination to the world in terms of, a lot of firms leaving China might come to India. I still remember, a lot of writings came that, Vietnam is there, but India will overtake Vietnam in terms of attracting capital, and that industrialization push will happen. And we have missed the bus earlier, but this time we will not miss the bus kind of an approach was there. But the second wave of COVID actually hit India very badly in terms of its preparedness, which means that now investors don't see India as that kind of a major attractive destination, for a simple reason that our handling of the pandemic itself did not give clear signals to investors. So I think we missed the bus again. Post that, when we look at the policy response, we find that we are going back to our conventional policy thing, that is basically road construction. Because the multiplier effect and the employment effect of road construction. So if you look at the most recent budget announcement, also Gati Shakti, large portion of Gati Shakti is road again. So we are back to our old kind of a policy approach that roads generate employment as well as linkages, and then the subsequent medium-term impacts of that. And that is why in the last two budgets we find that there is an increased allocation for that. But then, as you say, the problem is precisely in terms of targeting and identifying sectors, because we will again end up in the situation where at an aggregate we might have higher rate of growth. Disaggregated picture might look very, very varied. For example, textiles is one area where we find that, on the whole, there had not been very serious decline in gross value added from textiles. The lockdown happened. But the kind of, distress which, units in Tirupur and other places really went through is something which has to be accounted for. So we need to have little more micro-based approaches in terms of, sector-wise thing, other than having what we had in the earlier Make in India policy, where we had 25 sectors earmarked. We had given 5 years. Within this 5 years, 25 sectors would come like this kind of a thing. One small kind of a positive thing that could happen there is the PLI. This whole, production-linked incentives thing. At the moment, PLI is basically restricted to certain high-tech sectors. And employment generation in these high-tech sectors are not very high. So we need to have a toned down or a different kind of a version of the PLI to the employment generating sectors. And that has to be very carefully planned in terms of getting more employment, I think. Other than that, I can't offhand.
No.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, Suresh. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, there is I think you almost answered. There is in the chat box a question which is the same what Professor Das asked, that, how do you see the potential role of manufacturing sector, especially MSME, in the growth process, keeping in view its employment intensive nature? Obviously, you answered that more or less.
The thing is that we need to really look after MSMEs now.
Yes.
when we look at the value addition from MSMEs, well, we might not be seeing it as the drivers of growth, but when we look at an employment perspective, yes. We see also some growth rates in terms of MSME recently. But I would say we need to be a little clear in terms of interpreting these growth rates, because the whole push towards formalization has actually converted a lot of informal enterprises to formal enterprises. So these might not be the new enterprises that have really come. So the growth in these formal numbers might be from an existing unit itself, which would have been operating in the informal sector earlier. So that has to be really brought into mind when we look at and interpret these growth numbers that we see. Clearly, the MSMEs need some kind of an approach. And we really see that, especially in states like Tamil Nadu and all, where there is a large MSME sector, the distress has been very, very large. Partly that is because of this weak linkages between the large firms and the small firms. Because the linkages of the large firms are predominantly outside this ecosystem, not within the ecosystem. And MSMEs linkages and markets are within this system. So this linkages, if we can strengthen, perhaps we could be able to reap some rewards.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other question? Any other participants has any pressing query? Please.
I think let me compliment Suresh. I think is one great thing is so clear in the presentation and so detailed. So it's like listening to a great teacher, actually.
Anyway, if there are no other questions, I should, I think we are, Amarendra, is time 1:30. We have crossed 10 minutes. Am I right?
Yes, sir. We should break for lunch.
Yes, we should break for lunch. And it was really a pleasure listening to Suresh, and in fact, very fitting lecture on the theme of the conference. And I hope it benefited most of the listeners here. And I think Suresh did a brilliant job in terms of opening up debates and issues during his lecture, apart from providing evidence to the topic that he proposed to talk on. I think a big hand to Suresh, and it's really a pride for me to see you speaking and people appreciating you, Dr. Suresh Babu. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let's wind up the session. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much. And Amarendra, we have a deal. I will come and visit.
Yes.
ORISSA.
Yes, of
That's
course.
Which is
that Suresh, even I missed, because I was thinking
Yeah.
we'll have to get together in my own native place.
Yeah.
So of everything, got fizzled out because of this. So we should have something. I think Suresh, I would say in this session itself, inform Amarendra that we are perhaps going to have an occasion for this Odisha vision document.
Yes.
Oh.
And if you can serve as a reviewer of it, it would be much better.
Sure,
Because,
sure.
yeah.
Sir will love to host you all, sir. Please come to Sambalpur, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Pati. Very nice of you. I think it's well organized. I'm so happy that it is completely hassle-free and it's going okay. It's going quite
It's your institute. It's your institution, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Definitely. It's a pleasure. Even though virtually to be with you, it's really a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So with your permission, sir, we'll now break for lunch and we'll again rejoin at 3 p.m. sharp.
Okay.
And I want to inform everyone that we have created 2 different Zoom links for 2 parallel sessions to be conducted. So we have already shared the links with the participants and the panelists. So please rejoin at 3 p.m. Before that, a deep sense of gratitude to Professor Udayasankar Mishra, sir, the chairperson of this session, and also to Professor M. Suresh Babu, sir, for the nice deliberation. Thank you all, sir.
Thank you.